All right. I am joined by Nathan Alexander, who is the co-host of the Beyond Atheism podcast. I was just on there to talk about the new book about Christopher Hitchens. And so thought it might be fun to have him on to break down a Hitchens debate. So how are you doing, Nathan?
Yeah, pretty good. Yes. How are you?
I am good. And before we get started, I did invite good friend Doug Lane to come on for just a minute to tell us about his new YouTube channel and Patreon and the stuff that he's got going. So let us just bring on Doug for a moment. All right, Doug, can't hear you. All right, you're muted, Doug. But I still can't hear you. I can see your lips moving. All right. Well, Doug figures this out. Nathan, you want to tell us a little bit about this? This is, my general thought. Oh, hey, nice.
All right. Sorry about that. I feel like I'm in a cell phone commercial. So yeah, thanks for having me on. And I'm sorry I wasn't more prepared. I had stuff plugged in the wrong way here. So you wanted me to talk about the new YouTube?
Yeah. Just tell us a little bit about the new stuff that you've got going on. You kind of announced this morning and where people can find it.
Well, the first thing I'll say about the new YouTube channel is it's remarkably similar to the old YouTube channel. I'm doing podcasts and montage videos on critical theory, and I might introduce a new series called Zoomer Philosophy, based on my kid pestering me to do videos with him. He wants to do an episode about how Plato says that you don't have to read. So we'll have a discussion on that. It's starting up now. I just did a interview with Brilliant Somai. He made me pronounce his name correctly a few times. He's a Turkish writer and philosopher. Gene Bajlan says that he's the Turkish version of Zizek. Okay. And I think that he's a friend of Zizek's. We talked about Zizek's love life in the interview towards the end. All so right. You want the juicy stuff, that's where it is. And I have a Patreon. It's doing well. About 166 patrons today on the first day. So not bad. And you can go over there and help me out to keep going.
Yeah. So, I should say for anybody who doesn't have the context for this, all this used to be the Zero Books, YouTube channel and Patreon. So anybody who used to follow all of that, it's all the, it's the same content,
it's new content. It's not the same content. The old content is on their channel.
Okay, it's not it's not the same videos, but right. it's the kind of content that you do and loved there. I see that you're going back to the name that you were using for old projects a long time ago, Diet Soap. This fun fact, I think very few people know this, but I actually wrote a short story that was published in what was then the magazine Diet Soap in 2008. So there we go. That's I think
the magazine dates back to 1992 when it was a zine that I made at Kinko's when I was 21, and then in around 2008 we relaunched Diet Soap as a journal. MK Hobson and I, and we got real writers to write for it instead of just our friends at the cafe. And I started podcasting in 2009, thinking this would be a way to promote the zine. And then it turned quickly into its own thing. And I did that for about 5 years before that landed me at Zero Books. And now I've exited from there. And after a disagreement about things, we've come to an agreement, and I'm starting on my own again under the title Diet Soap.
Yeah. So that's patreon.com/Diet Soap. And what's the YouTube channel?
The YouTube channel. Oh, good. I think it's if you just look up Douglas Lane on YouTube, you'll find it. But yeah, I don't have that right. Yeah, it's Douglas Lane is the name of the YouTube channel, and it's it's a string of random letters at this point. So I don't have a. I think if you type in YouTube, see Douglas Lane, you'll find it.
Nobody types in URLs for YouTube anyway. Just search Doug Lane, and you'll
it's www.youtube.com. Okay.
Yeah, we could do this for
https://. Okay, I'm sorry.
All right, sounds good. And we'll put those links in the description for these videos, and we will be talking more to Doug on this channel very, very soon.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. It was a big help. And sorry I was late.
No problem. All right.
Okay. All right.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
All right. So Nathan, I was just saying this. The debate that we're watching tonight is one that I had not seen. I've seen it. I've seen a ton of these. This I was not familiar with. You kind of brought to my attention with Robert Wright. So what's the context for this?
I guess, well, the personal context for me anyway is I remember about 10 years ago watching this video when I was sort of like in the throes of the new atheist phase. And at the time, I was sort of thinking like anyone that Hitchens is debating, like the other person must be an idiot, basically.
Yeah.
And that's how I sort of watched the debate back then. But I rewatched it a couple weeks ago. I think like when we were going to have you on the podcast, I think I was sort of remembering it. And I found myself a lot more sympathetic to some of the arguments that Robert Wright was making in the debate. So I thought it would be good to watch it because it's interesting. It's different than his other debates about religion, which are usually with theists like Christians
Right.
or whoever. Whereas like Robert Wright's coming from a secular perspective for the most part.
So what's the disagreement between them about that? Like the sort of core thing they're talking about here?
I think the main thing is this issue of anti-theism, I guess, like this idea that not only is like religion untrue, it's also like harmful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's sort of a point of disagreement. I think that's the main thing they sort of talk about. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, good. So this is gonna be fun. Since I am usually, when I watch Hitchens debates, well, anything from before 2001, I think he's right about whatever he's saying. After 2001, it's more half and half, depending on the topic. I'm not crazy about his side of the woods about the Iraq War, but the religion stuff, it's like, okay, I always think he's overselling the anti-theism, but he's usually arguing with people who think that who are theists and who not only are theists but are often people who think that like you can't make sense of morality without theism and things like that. So like even though I don't really go along with the Hitchens anti-theism, I'm sort of rooting for him in those anyway, in a weird way, right? So so this will be a different experience.
Yeah, I think it's good because I think they both make some good points. So I think, so it's not a straightforward debate where it's like one side is off. Well, from our perspective, like one side is obviously right.
Yeah.
I think there's like, so I think that's something that's interesting. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, hey, let's get right to it. Let's see. Share screen. Yeah. There we go. Oh, this is was this on Blogging Heads originally?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, they actually have like there's two debates, and the other one they talk more about foreign policy. I'm not sure if I assume that's somewhere on YouTube as well, because like I think Robert Wright also disagrees with them about the Iraq War.
Right. Okay.
So yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. Sounds good. So even though I think I'm probably more or less on Team Right for this, I did appropriately prepare to
Okay.
watch this. So let's get it going. Let's watch a few minutes.
Hi, Christopher.
Robert.
This is the second of 2 dialogues that we're taping consecutively, which will explain why some of our clothing may seem familiar, at least in my case, to people. And I think I plan to use this fact defensively. Should my mind seem to weaken, it's 2 consecutive hours of discussion / debate with Christopher Hitchens is something that no one should have to do. It's strenuous, but
thank you. I think
we persist. What'd you say?
I said thank you. I think.
Yes. No, I meant that in a nice way. We'll get to the stuff that I don't mean in a nice way shortly. In fact, let's start with one. The one thing. Okay, we're going to talk about religion now, and one thing I've always wanted to ask you is about the subtitle of your well-known book, "God is Not Great," which is I think it's either how or why religion poisons everything.
Yeah.
Probably how, right? And I've often wondered how literally you mean that. I mean, you don't mean I shouldn't drink this glass of water because everything has been poisoned by religion, right? You're not taking it quite that far.
No, but I do say that it does, so to speak, poison the whole well, in that it attacks us in our deepest integrity. The main point I encounter in debates with the faithful is the claim that without the supernatural guidance, we wouldn't ourselves be able to determine right and wrong or distinguish between the two. That we're playthings of a dictated morality. And I find that objectionable for so many reasons, but the one I'll isolate for this purpose is that it appears to rob us of our responsibility as well as our integrity. And so, yes, that actually would, once that attack's been made, it will creep into absolutely everything, and I think does.
Mm-hmm. I guess I don't think it's as easy as some people do to, and this is not a defensive of faith by itself. It's just a point. I don't find it as easy as it is commonly asserted by, in particular, Dan Dennett, for someone without reference to religious assumptions to construct a morality and indeed to sustain a belief in absolute right and wrong. Now, I myself am faced with that challenge because I don't subscribe to any conventional religious faith or claim any kind of revealed faith that would guide me here. So I'm familiar with the problem of trying to construct on a secular foundation a moral philosophy to live by. I actually think, and I think most philosophers who study what is it called, meta-ethics, I guess, the ultimate foundations of ethics, I think most of them would agree it's a quite contentious question as to whether it is doable. I mean, where do your moral? I mean, you tell me. You, I think, believe in right and wrong in some fairly absolute sense. You tell me if you don't believe in God, where do you get these beliefs?
Well, I don't know where I get them from, but I know there were things that I was, so to speak, born knowing and didn't need to have, excuse me, instilled in me or inculcated. And I think that the origin of them is what's made our civilization possible, which is that as a species, once we left the savannah, it was necessary to have, well, and indeed I'm sure on the savannah as well, to have a certain degree of solidarity, reciprocity, mutual aid. It might sound reductionist to say that it's evolutionarily advantageous to have this. Other species have it too, as we've observed. They have families, they have solidarity in the face of enemies, they care for their children, and so for their young, let's say. It's not peculiar to us, but we have a special awareness of it, and we seem to have a revulsion to the same sorts of things. In other words, keep it at the primitive level for now, I mean, incest and cannibalism, say, hardly need to be forbidden by any religious code. Some religious codes actually almost mandate them, but they don't last for very long because people who practice incest or cannibalism won't make it. Those societies will collapse, or those tribes will collapse. Now, some people would want to say, I suppose, this sounds a bit cold or a bit mechanistic. I mean, what of altruism and so forth? Well, I can't tell you either why it is that I get pleasure from making a blood donation. But I do. I enjoy doing it. I feel I've done a good thing. Makes my day. In addition to that, I haven't lost a pint of blood, or only for a few minutes. I regain it with a strong cup of tea. But someone else has gained one. And I happen also to have a very rare blood group, so I have a general interest in the blood donor system continuing to function. I don't think there's any need to involve a supernatural being in this. And if there is, then you have to explain why that supernatural being so often wants you to do immoral things. And he'll tell you, you must destroy not just the Amalekites militarily and the Midianites, but you must kill all their children and enslave for prostitution their women
and
so
the livestock. If you
yes, I mean, these things are, or you must mutilate the genitals of your children, something that wouldn't naturally occur to me to do. You'll suddenly present you with a baby girl or a baby boy. You think, here's the first thing I've got to do to prove I'm in line with divine morality. I must find a sharp stone and hack around at their genitalia, which appears to suggest, by the way, that the argument from design is also nonsense because you're born into the world with stuff that God thinks is superfluous, having gone to all that trouble to make you in his image. Yeah. This is nonsense. It's also, I think, wicked nonsense.
Yeah, he could have saved himself some trouble by just
could. So
just redesigning the
what's obvious to me is, therefore, supernatural morality is not, in fact, supernatural. It's the projection of the man-made onto other human beings.
Yeah, I certainly don't deny that. I still think it's not so easy to construct an airtight absolute morality from sheerly secular premises. Again, I'm in a position where I have to try myself. It just doesn't seem that easy. I mean, you said that there are things that for whatever reason feel good. Well, I think the knowledge that we're designed by natural selection should lead us all to cast some suspicion on all the things that naturally feel good. I mean, there's reason to believe that rape under certain circumstances, and certainly killing under certain circumstances that most of us would not applaud, is natural, and that the impulse to do it is natural. That doesn't mean we should obey the impulse, right?
No, when I say it makes me feel good, of course, I don't just mean it gives me a bang, because there are things that I've enjoyed doing that I've also felt bad about doing. I don't think I necessarily want to specify, but I'm sure anyone...
Feel free.
I'm sure all the customers know roughly what one's talking about, the various kinds of opportunism. But it's a strange thing. One definition of morality, as you know, is what you do when nobody's looking. Conscience is one word for it. That's the one that C.S. Lewis preferred. Adam Smith called it your unseen auditor. You feel that you don't want to be looked at askance by someone who don't actually know, but you can imagine taking a bit of a dim view of what you're doing. There are various attempts at it, but it does seem to be, except for the proportion of socio and psychopathic people in the population, who either get positive pleasure from unkindness to others, or who don't realize that other people are also important. He's presumably also made in God's image, and or are, I would prefer to say, the product of natural selection. But for ordinary discourse, I think it's enough to say that children indeed, can be seen to have some innate sense of fairness, of what's cruel, of what's nasty, even though it may need some reinforcement.
Yeah, but of course, we're using cruel and nasty as if the definitions were self-evident, and the whole problem of metaethics is to come up with a premise about what is good to begin with, and then build on that. Well, now, I myself am a utilitarian because I think it's just about self-evident that human happiness, human welfare is a good thing.
Yes.
But I think if you don't posit something like that, I don't know where you go. And I kind of doubt, although I don't know that you would call yourself a utilitarian. So I don't know where you get your premises.
I find utilitarianism a bit thin, but I'm perfectly willing to have as common ground that the obligations of society, the human solidarity, as I prefer to call it, are, if you discharge them, if you live up to them, feel obliged by them, they're good for others and good for you. And it hardly needs to be pointed out that you have an interest in the welfare of other people. For example, I want other people to have good health because I don't want infectious disease in the school my children go to. I want everyone to be vaccinated, all this kind of thing. I mean, it's very ABC. The difference,
timely example,
seems to me, between that and religion is this. Religion can order good people to do bad things. That's the surprising thing. We'll say, you are to consider your homosexual friend less than human. You are to consider women to be an inferior creation. Every monotheism says that at one point or another, sometimes very emphatically.
So that was interesting. Those first few minutes, I mean, I think we're sort of veering into more familiar Hitchens argument about religion territory here. But but I've got to say, I mean, I'd be interested in hearing your take on this. From in that first little part, I actually do have a very familiar feeling for me for watching a certain kind of Hitchens religion debate, which is that I actually think he's right about this part, but I'm very frustrated by how he's like going about it, because because I think what Robert Wright is raising about metaethics, that Hitchens never makes the point that I really want him to make about this. Just like in all of the his collection, back and forth with Douglas Wilson, his Christianity, good for the world. They end up spending like half of it talking about this, and Hitchens never quite makes the point that I really wish he would make, which is just, okay, you're right. And I think Hitchens is even like a little off topic in responding to this. Like I don't think you almost get the sense that he doesn't quite get what Wright is saying about this. You're right. Metaethics is really hard. And it is tricky and non-obvious, how to make sense of what ultimately makes things, right or wrong, what the, right and wrong, really mean, all this stuff. But, the part of what Wright is saying that I find objectionable is that when he says it's tricky to come up with this absolute right and wrong based on purely secular premises, which suggests that it's like made easier somehow if you add religion. Right. And that's the part that I think is just wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like, Hitchens somewhat is like, I think he is thrown off because, like he's used to debating religious people, so he's trying to sort of debate it on those terms. But yeah, I think that is like that is a good answer because I think it's true that it's difficult. It's genuinely difficult. I mean, like philosophers have been coming up with ethics since the beginning of philosophy, and they really are still sort of, there's not a well-defined answer to this question, I guess, to everyone's satisfaction.
Right.
So I do think like maybe he might have, like you said, been willing to admit like, it is a difficult question for secular people, but it doesn't get any easier if you're religious. And in some ways it's, I mean, there's just new problems that are raised if you posit morality comes from God or from a holy book or whatever.
Yeah, I mean this is extraordinarily unoriginal. I mean this goes back to like the kind of the very beginning of all that process of nobody being able to answer the stuff to everybody's satisfaction, right? Lots of definite answers, but lots of disagreement about which one is right. That you're talking about. Because was it Alfred North Whitehead, I think, famously says that all philosophy, I mean, he reads Western philosophy, right? All of Western philosophy is footnotes to Plato. And, Plato's got the Euthyphro problem, right? Socrates is arguing with this ancient Greek holy man, Euthyphro, about the definition of holiness. He asks him this question, which translated a little bit from what they were talking about there, like the the thought when people talk about the youth for a problem now is if you say morality comes from God, right? Then say, all right, well, does God want you to do X, Y, and Z because X, Y, and Z are morally good, or are they morally good because God wants you to do them? And if you say the first one, that he wants you to do them because they're morally good, then you've just shown the religious assumption to be totally redundant to the meta ethics question. That that it's not that if God wants you to do these things because they're morally good, then they're morally good for some other reason. And the question of figuring out what that other reason is isn't any easier for the theist than the atheist. And then if you say that no, it's only good because God wants them, then you've got the okay, but so I guess we just got lucky that that God happens to
Yes.
happens to want us to be kind and charitable and loving, because he could just as easily have wanted us to be cruel and vicious and et cetera, et cetera. And then I guess the point that Hitchens would make here is that a lot of classical religious texts, it's not clear that God does want us to be kind and loving and et cetera. But put that aside, right? Like assume for the sake of argument that he does, right? That's if you think that's the only thing that makes those things good, then you just have to embrace all of these crazy hypotheticals that that if God wanted you to Moses had come down from Mount Sinai with tablets saying thou shalt kill whosoever shall annoy you, and take their stuff and and etc., then that would be morally good. But if you're not willing to embrace that, so anyway, that would be my objection. I mean, that Wright is right, that the I'm gonna have to start saying correct, so that doesn't sound funny, but Wright is correct that that meta ethics is hard, but it just seems, and I'll even give him that Hitchens is sort of not quite addressing the question, because he's sort of talking about how does it come to be that we have sort of moral impulses or something like that, which seems like a slightly different question.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. Like there's two issues. I don't think it's the case that humans construct a whole system of morality and then act upon that. It seems like morality is in some sense innate within us, and that's could be for evolutionary reasons and for reasons of socialization and so on. But then there's there's the question of why we are moral, and then there's the question of how do we make moral decisions when we're sort of reasoning about it. And I feel it could be, I don't know, what do you think about this, but a lot of moral arguments are sort of after the fact justifications. Your sort of intuition is to do something, and then you come up with a reason for why you're doing that.
No, I mean, for sure that happens a lot. I mean, I think that I hope, right, that at least sometimes we can actually reflect on it at our leisure. That we can do stuff that's not just motivated reasoning on quite that level. I mean, I think it still ultimately has to be driven by moral intuitions, because if it's not, I don't know what it would possibly be driven by. But we can at least do what John Rawls calls, or I guess he's getting this term from linguistics, reflective equilibrium. That we say, okay, I have a this feels morally wrong, but then this other thing feels really wrong, and could those both be true? And how can we sort of fit this into an internally consistent picture? I mean, I think that's what moral reasoning is for. And I'm not I think on some level you might just have to say that there's not once you sort of get down to somebody could nitpick this, but let's just call it good enough for now, right? Once you get down to your most basic commitments or something like that you can't justify those in terms beyond that, right? But then, like, again, my big point here would just be, but neither can the theist. Like, there's nothing about adding that in that actually helps you with this problem.
Yeah, I mean, like, if it were true that there were a God who did kind of lay down moral rules for us, then that would be a lot easier. But I mean, that doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, if God exists and we are aware of His will, then certainly on an epistemic level, right? I mean, that could be incredibly useful, right? We would, that would be a good way to know what is morally, right and wrong. You wouldn't have to reason about it, but like, I'd still say on like a metaphysical level, like what makes things, right or wrong.
True. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's hard to say how adding God helps. So anyway, it's what I wish Hitchens would have said here. But let's see what else he says.
These are not helpful to our evolution at all. In fact, they're gravely retarded. You are to mutilate the genitals of your children, for example. You are to regard infidels as people who should be enslaved or killed. It's the wickedness that's preached by religion that intrigues me. It's so often assumed that, oh, well, the Ten Commandments are at least okay. Well, look, there's no society ever been known where perjury and theft and murder are highly prized. And there were many, many human societies long before the mythical events that are supposed to have occurred in Sinai. We don't need God to tell us that. It takes the same God of Moses to order and license and give a warrant for slavery, rape, genocide, and mutilation.
Right. I know. I don't think we do need God to tell us in a fundamental sense to be good. I think that there are various intuitions that you and I would both endorse that are natural. And indeed, there are ethical premises that people everywhere happen upon, regardless of how divergent their religion. So it's hard to attribute that to certainly to any one religion. But I think maybe where we differ is the question of whether religion is necessary to do bad. You're right that religion can order people to murder. Well, so can nationalism. So can anything that is given moral force by people who subscribe to it. And everyone attribute moral force to something, pretty much to something they subscribe to. And when they kill people, they justify it in those terms.
Of course.
What's not clear to me
is that people do have a tendency to decide that violence is justified in their own case. But if you want a multiplier for racism and nationalism too, if you say that this nation or race has God on its side, I mean, as you know, the belt buckles of every soldier in the German army that organized Hitler's genocidal imperialism, the belt buckle reads "Gott mit uns" in German. God is with us. It's a huge multiplier of what might already be latent in possessive, acquisitive human beings. I think you'll find that's consistent across the board.
Of course, most American soldiers were probably believers, and their courage during the war, that very same war, was probably sustained by the belief that they would go to heaven. And I think you would say they were on the right side. So it seems to me that in that case, it's certainly far from being the case that religion was on balance. No, I mean, and of course, the Americans won.
That's true, but it would support my point that this is man-made, because it can't possibly be that God was on both sides.
Well, certainly man-made. Christopher, you're not going to get an argument with me about that stuff.
No, I'm not trying to pick one. I'm just saying it's an
I want to get back to the subtitle of your book, How Religion Poisons Everything. It's just not evident to me that it does. So what do you say?
I think that religion makes good people consider doing or justify doing bad things. And I'd add that it often makes very intelligent people say very stupid things.
And it also often makes people do very good things. What do you say about someone like Martin Luther King, who I think we both say did very good things, who presumably was sustained and fortified by his religious faith? Is that not an example of religious belief doing good?
Without knowing the man, I can't be sure of that. I know two things. One, I would propose one thing and I would say I knew another. I think it's highly unlikely that he would have been indifferent to the civil rights of Black Americans if he wasn't a Christian. After all, most of the people who organized and started the civil rights movement were secularists. They've all been written out of the record now, but the people who actually organized the March on Washington, people like Bayard Rustin, famous social democrat, people like A. Philip Randolph, the great black trade union leader,
Right.
Walter Reuther of the United Automobile Workers, none of these people were godly in the least. That's the first thing. I don't know. Of course, you don't have to believe in God to believe that African Americans have rights. Second,
Right.
it is tactically certainly true that in the conditions of the South at that point, you had a better chance of getting your voice heard and broadcast, and also a certain immunity if you were doing it from the pulpit, because it's the most Christian part of the country, and also because the justification for slavery in the first place and later for segregation was biblical.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a way of tactically turning the tables, but that only replaces the question, doesn't it? I mean, it was Christianity that brought this horrific state of affairs about. Third, I'd add, by preaching the Exodus myth, that was his template. He's always going on about promised land, etc. We're fortunate that Dr. King didn't seem to believe what he said, because the Exodus myth entitles the oppressed and wandering people to kill anyone who gets in their way and take their land, rape their women, enslave their children. Fortunately, he wasn't a believer in the Testament.
Well, that fact points to what I've noticed again and again, which is the exquisite adaptability of religion and the ability of people to selectively resort to Scripture to do either good or bad. In this case, it seems to me good. I would say, in the case of the fact that Christianity brought us slavery and the fact that there were secular people on Martin Luther King's side, of course, there were also very religious abolitionists. Again, it seems to me about 50-50 on balance. In any event, the idea that religion poisons everything is a long way from
not 50-50, no.
Can I just ask you, are you saying Martin Luther King was not religious and cynically used the pulpit? Did I hear you saying that?
No, I wasn't him, and I didn't know him, so I don't know whether he was a sincere believing Christian or not. I mean, he studied Hegel and Marx when he was in college. He had a lot of friends. Most of his friends seem to have been secular leftists.
Well,
I don't know if he wasn't. What he thought when he was alone, whether he really prayed and really believed prayers were answered, I have no idea what he. If he confined himself to praying, he certainly would have got nowhere.
I haven't heard you.
Just wrong about 50 with abolitionism. Centuries of Christian-endorsed slavery, and then a few decades where a minority of Christians finally decide that this is intolerable. But the people who founded the American Anti-Slavery Society, for example, Benjamin Franklin was a member, Thomas Paine was a member. These were not believers. The chances that you would be a non-believer and an abolitionist would be much, much, much higher than that you'd be a Christian. And to this day, where slavery is officially practiced anywhere in the world, it's always with the authority of a religious text. Well, that's actually not, except in North Korea, which I would define as a slave state, which is a worshipful pagan state, worships human beings. Generally, most slavery in Africa now is justified by the Quran.
I mean, I would say two things about Martin Luther King. One is, yes, there were various secular people involved in the civil rights movement. Again, I don't think religion particularly disposes you toward good. I'm not making that argument. I'm making the argument that it often does good, and so that the subtitle of your book, unless it's meant as hyperbole or as a joke, is overstated. And I would say in the case of King, true, there were many secular people, but he, more than anyone, showed more than anyone I can think of, showed the kind of courage that is almost uniquely evinced by believing that there's a good chance you'll be assassinated pretty soon if you keep speaking in public, and yet speaking in public. And that's the kind of thing that a Christian can do because they think they're going to heaven. Now, secondly, I would say, you entertain these doubts as to whether he's really religious, and of course that's convenient for your analysis since he clearly did good.
No, I just say that I can't know it.
If I can just finish, I have not heard you entertain those kinds of doubts about radical imams, who I would say are at least as likely to be cynically using religion, but that's not a theme I've heard you emphasize.
Oh, well, then you should have done. I mean, when you hear radical imams saying to people, if you put on this belt and blow yourself up and kill the Jews, the sons of pigs and monkeys, you'll go straight to paradise. It actually occurred in the minds of some people who've given up suicide bombing. If you're so sure of that, why don't you do it yourself, Imam? Why don't you? Of course, I think that au fond, at bottom, all religion is partly hypocritical and partly racketeering. I just don't say that it all is. Now, just back to King for a second. I don't know that he was a true believer. I can't know that. He was able to give sermons that would stir even someone like myself. I can say that much. What you said about him, though, and his willingness to die for his beliefs could just as well be said, and was often said, of heroic communists, including in the South, by the way, where the American Communist Party's most shining record is in the civil rights movement. What does that say to you about American communism? It says nothing to me. I suppose it stands to their credit that they did do that, but it proves exactly nothing about the doctrine of communism. All their heroes in the Spanish Civil War, or the resistance to Hitler, and so forth. I mean, you could easily say it, but it would be trivial.
I'm not saying religion is a prerequisite for good or courage or anything else. You're the one with the subtitle, Why Religion or How Religion Poisons Everything.
Yeah, and I've explained why I think that's so. I think it's an attack on our integrity. It says that we are the playthings of the supernatural.
Well, right.
That we're excused our own responsibility, and we wouldn't even know right from wrong if it wasn't for divine ordination. Revelation. I think that makes us contemptible. It makes you a slave right there. And if you're a slave, then all the pleasures of art, which religion has contributed to, music, which it's contributed to, so all of these things are transient because you're by definition an unfree person. So I believe that the crucial emancipation that every individual and every society ultimately has to make is from religion. There. I'll say it all again if you like.
Well, no, you don't have to. And in a way, the reason I dwelt in the beginning of this dialogue on how it is that a secular person goes about constructing an ethical system was to establish my belief that basically pretty much everyone gets by in life on the basis of some beliefs that they actually can't prove, okay? And in that sense, it's not strictly rational. And in that sense, religion is not uniquely irrational in helping people provide themselves with a foundation for ethics. Now, forgive me, but in the various things you said in response to my questions, I did not hear any kind of coherent argument about why you should trust certain moral intuitions or why X is good or Y is good. And I'm really not sure you've done the work to permit yourself to say that whereas religious people have to accept something on faith or something they can't prove, you get by in life without anything of that sort. It's not clear to me that that's the case. So if what you're saying with that subtitle is that religion uniquely keeps us from having an entirely rational foundation for our lives, I beg to differ. I think almost no one has an entirely rational foundation for their life. And I fear to say that maybe one of the people who has the best case for having one would be someone like Nietzsche. I mean, I think it's certainly internally consistent to say that nothing is morally self-evident to you, and in that rational. But
right. Well, first, I don't disagree with you about the partly rational because we're members of a primate species that's the product of evolution by mutation and natural selection, and our prefrontal lobes are not quite as big as they might be, and our adrenaline glands are probably larger than we need, and we are only partially rational, and it certainly shows. We're only half a chromosome away from being chimpanzees, but we, I think, have ways of revering and preserving our rational faculties. If you ask me who I thought had done that best, I would say Spinoza. Spinoza's ethics are very persuasive, and they're not derived from anything that comes from divine revelation or the supernatural.
Whose ethics? I'm sorry, whose ethics?
Spinoza, first known as Baruch, but then when expelled and excommunicated and condemned, ostracized by his synagogue in Amsterdam, and condemned by all the Christian churches in Europe as well, became Benedict Spinoza.
A pantheist by common description, right?
Yeah, well, yes, pantheism is the only way. He's not even a deist. I mean, he says that God is sort of everywhere and everything.
Right.
He repudiates the idea of a personal God. Then the second very intriguing question, what things can we say are true for all time? Now, what most people have hit upon is the golden rule. sometimes known as love thy neighbor, sometimes love thy neighbor as thyself, which I think is, by the way, impossible, and even immoral because it demands something of you can't do, so you'll have to go on failing, so therefore you'll have to feel guilty. No one's going to love people like they love themselves and their own families. So it's guilt-inducing and coercive. But or sometimes stated as it was by Rabbi Hillel and Confucius, long before any monotheism by Confucius in the Analects, don't do to another person what you wouldn't like done to yourself. Now, is that really true for all time and all people? I would actually say not. It's only as good as the person saying it, for one thing. I mean,
well, wait.
I don't want Charles Manson to be treated as I want to be treated. I don't. There are a lot of people I think should be treated worse than me, and I could give you persuasive reasons why I think that's so, but I couldn't say I'd found an absolute truth, and neither can any religious spokesman do that.
Of course, the way people get around that is they say that I would not ask myself to be treated, to be kept out of prison if I murdered people. And so they maintain an internal consistency while subscribing to the golden rule. But you're right. That's why subscribing to the golden rule by itself will get you nowhere, because people are very good at thinking up reasons to exclude people.
I would call that casuistry.
What's that?
I wouldn't call it consistency. I'd call it casuistry. And when you're talking to people like that, they already have all the information they need, so that every new thing that is discovered or thought, they say, oh, actually, that was always in the Bible all along. There's no nourishment in a discussion of that kind.
Well,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was just sort of thinking of like the earlier point. I mean, I feel like in many cases, like Hitchens he digs in on issues that really don't matter that much. Like the thing about Martin Luther King, whether he's actually a Christian or not. I mean, I guess it's Well, I mean,
I actually
what do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually think Wright got him there, because I think that, Hitchens like rhetorically responded well when Wright said this, but like, I think the core of the point, like Wright is making a fair point that like, I don't, like when Hitchens will confidently assert that various bad things are caused by religious belief. He doesn't do this thing. It's like, well, look, I mean, I didn't, whoever, what's a good example? It's like the head of the Spanish Inquisition or whatever, I didn't know him. Right. So I don't know whether he was like really sincerely, personally devout or not, and so it does seem like there's a double standard there.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess you could also make an opposite argument too. Maybe like you don't know for sure. I mean, technically, you don't know for sure if secular people are not closeted religious people or something like that, or even like maybe a theist might say like, well, actually, even though they're secular, nonetheless they were guided by like theistic morality, even though they didn't accept it or something like that. But I feel like he's sort of set himself up to defend like such a difficult issue where the subtitle of the book, like religion poisons everything, that he has to, it would have been so much easier to say like, yeah, obviously religion does some good things. And that's it. I mean, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. And I think it is a little bit unclear sometimes what everything is supposed to mean in that subtitle, right? I mean, like Wright was kind of having some fun with it at the beginning with the example about the glass of water, it's like obviously like a playful example. He knows that's not what he means, but like I'm actually still, I've read that book. I've seen a lot of debates where Hitchens talk about this stuff. I'm still not 100% sure what he means when he says religion poisons everything.
Yeah. I feel like, I feel like you could make the argument that even when a religious person does a good thing, like Martin Luther King Jr. or something, they could have done it for a secular reason, and that would have been more pure or something like that, or like more fulfilling because you're not doing it based on any supernatural beliefs. You're doing it for a more straightforward reason. Um, and so basically, like it could lead people into doing, even if you're doing good things, you're doing it for like the wrong reasons or something, even if you do hit on the right course of action.
Yeah, and sometimes like some of Hitchens' formulations actually in this debate tonight do kind of suggest that that's what he's saying. That, you know, when he says like it takes away our dignity by making us, you know, play things in the supernatural, and you know whatever he said there. Like I think part of the implication was, or it takes away our responsibility. You know, like I think that might be part of the implication that, you know, that it by sort of attributing your conscience to the stars or whatever, you know, that you're you know, maybe that's part of how he justifies everything, you know, that like that it's everything, you know, that like because even whether it's leading you to do good things or bad things, you know, you're at least not doing good things for a good reason, or you're not doing good things the right way because you're not taking responsibility for your own decisions. So I guess I can kind of see that, but I mean, sometimes it does seem like he's just saying that, like, you know, it's more bad than good overall, or, you know, something like that. Because he did say, like, there was that whole weird thing where, you know, where he was very intense about how, like, you know, it's not 50-50, you know, like it's really just a few abolitionists and, you know, whatever.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's really difficult, like to sort of like quantify it. I mean, you know, to sort of, how could you even do that to just say like, well, maybe it's not 50-50, but maybe it's like 75 good or 75 bad versus 25 good. I mean, like, how could you even begin to like to quantify that?
That is extremely tricky. I remember actually seeing a lecture by Brian Leiter, who's a philosophy professor and blogger, like 10 years ago or something, where he was making this sort of strange utilitarian argument for religious tolerance that was like, well, you know, it's religion clearly leads people to do, you know, to do really good things that they wouldn't do without it, you know, stand up to the stormtroopers or whatever. It also leads people to do really bad things, you know, they wouldn't do without it, like all the Hitchens examples. So yeah, right, you know, like you can't figure out whether it's, you know, it's more bad than good. So, you know, you should tolerate it. I guess so yeah, that's one thing that, right, just sort of saying like what actions have, you know, religious motivations that are good and are bad, and, you know, what the proportions are. I mean, it's very unclear to me if that's even like an important question to ask necessarily, but you know, but I guess to me, like, that kind of misses the point a little bit in a couple of ways. Like, you know, so one of them is just the Michael Brooks point from Against the Web that, you know, about, you know, in the Cosmopolitan Socialism chapter, which is, you know, Michael's getting from like Amartya Sen, and, you know, and is, you know, parts of this are like John Rawls and other people, but like which is that, okay, you know, religious traditions, you know, cultural traditions of any kind, which could include religious ones, are big, broad things, and they're going to include people who, you know, find justification in the language of, you know, in that particular set of cultural or religious language. You know, they find ways of expressing, you know, good, positive, progressive values, and, you know, terrible, disturbing, reactionary ones, and you know, that's sort of inevitable, and, you know, and so it's not clear that like no religion is the most important cleavage there. But then, like, the other thing I would get out about is what I kind of give him a hard time about in the book, which is that, you know, Hitchens claimed, I think in the bitter end, that, you know, he believed in some version of, you know, the materialist theory of history, which seems like if you take that seriously, well, it's no. I mean, neither the good things nor the. I mean, maybe on an individual level, but like on a sort of broad social historical level, right? Neither the good things nor the bad things are happening, because of religion. Exactly, right? They're happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Yeah, right. Like, yeah, religion is just a side effect or something like that of broader, broader changes, I guess. And it's not a driver; it's more of a consequence, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, I think you'd have to say that like it's. I mean, maybe like economic structures need to be rationalized in some way or another, or people aren't going to accept them, and so religion can and very often has played that role. But yeah, I mean, I think you'd end up having to say that things are happening because of these, material factors, and the religion mostly comes into it as a rationalization,
Mm-hmm.
of what was going to happen anyway. So I'm not sure. It's very unclear to me how he resolved that contradiction in his own head, and I, I mean, it's. I mean, it's complicated. I certainly don't want to say that like, religious or other ideas don't have any kind of like causal force in history. That seems way too strong. But like, but I do think that like, when he's endorsing the sort of materialist theory of history, I think he's probably more right, than when he's saying stuff like this, because like, okay, like when he talks about like all those like hundreds of years where the churches, the Church of England or whoever, was endorsing slavery. It's like, okay, but then like, is that because of something that's sort of like deep within their theology, that led them to do that, like. Or is it because like slavery was incredibly profitable and like so like people who were sort of allied to the status quo like had to come up with some way of justifying it?
Yeah, I think and I mean I think that one can find secular reasons to argue for slavery. I mean, sort of pseudoscientific, secular, I guess, reasons for slavery were also used to justify it. I mean, so I think it is the case that
race science, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like you can, if you want to do something, you can find a justification for it, and you'll sort of use the sort of cultural tools, I guess, that you have available to you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. And I'm sure. I mean, I guess I'm not sure because that would suggest that I've like read more about this history than I have. But it sounds very plausible to me what Hitchens is saying, that. Well, I think this is what he meant, that people who were free thinkers or religious skeptics of some sort were more likely to be abolitionists. That like that certainly sounds plausible to me, that if you're like somebody who's questioning one of the core beliefs of your society, you're more likely to be you're more likely to be somebody who's not making excuses for the most like horrifically unjust things your society is doing. But I guess so like, yeah, I could believe that there was a higher proportion there. I'm not quite sure about the lesson that he's drawing
Right.
from that.
Yeah, I guess there's another sort of like opposite thing to his argument, that religion is bad, but then like if you're secular, you're more likely to do good things, I guess. Which is not, I don't know if it directly follows from his argument, but I think it's something he's also kind of subtly suggesting as well, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. And he does this thing that I remember a lot of from the New Atheism era, where you sort of say, well, good people are gonna, it's no problem to make good people do good things, but it takes religion, to get good people to do bad things, and that seems that seems pretty overly simplistic to me. Like I think Wright was making some good points about that earlier too. That like any intensely held belief system, is going to be. I mean, like unless you're just like I don't know, really intense about the categorical imperative or something, but like almost any intensely held belief system is going to be something that can be used to get people to do monstrous things in its name. And I guess like Hitchens doesn't do this quite as much as some of the other ones did, I think, but like there is this kind of shady move that you could do to try to explain that away, where like you sort of redefine every intensely held belief as being a kind of religion.
Yes, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, definitely. But I mean, I do think just to speak up for Hitchens, I mean, like, I do think it can, like he said, like earlier, like it can be a multiplier. Basically, like if there's already a bad situation, I guess in some ways, like believing you're following the divine will or something, that can, support you in your cause more and make you more fervent than you might otherwise be. So I think there's probably something to that argument as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, sure. I'm sure that's true. I mean, I think that I think that like the least plausible, like in God is not great. Like, he's got this chapter where he's sort of like going through the obvious examples of religion making people do good things, like Martin Luther King, and I'm not like. I think he has a good case about Gandhi, because Gandhi actually kind of sucked if you start looking into him, a little bit more. But Martin Luther King, as we've seen here, like his case is a little bit less convincing. And then on the other end, I mean, where I find him the least convincing is when he's sort of trying to assimilate Stalin, to religion. By sort of saying like, well, there was all this, all these centuries of religion being used to condition people to obey authority. So therefore, that Stalin could do, like it's a very it's a, I mean, it's like good hustle, but like, but it really feels like a stretch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I do see the argument there. But yeah, it does seem like you're definitely kind of stretching the definition of religion to then it's just like whatever you don't like is religion. I mean, I guess that's another sort of issue, but maybe it's too much of a tangent to go into. But just like the fuzziness of the definition of religion, like what does he mean by that?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. Yeah.
No, but I mean, it is a big question. But I mean, it's a good question. I mean, like it seems like. So I mean, in God is not great. He sort of got his chapter like very quickly. Going after the Eastern religions just for the sake of completeness.
Right. Yes.
It really seems like 97% of what he says about this topic is really about like Abrahamic monotheisms, being bad, and that's usually where he has a much better case, because he just knows them so much better, and it's a little, like, because that's a really good question. What is what's the definition of religion that like clearly includes Buddhism or whatever, and is and such that the sort of core things that he thinks are wrong with the Western monotheisms are also wrong with that, it's definitely unclear, but we should go back to it.
It's the same as saying those who are without sin, only those without sin can cast the first stone. It's a completely preposterous idea, as is the idea of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Both these extreme positions on morality are taken in the Bible, and both of them are utterly useless to us. One is savage and boring, and the other is insipid and inapplicable. I'm saying wherever we are going to find moral rules that are more or less consistent across time and societies. And we are very lucky as a species in that there's almost no difference between us. I mean, the variation among humankind is so tiny as to be almost not measurable. If we were dogs, we'd all be the same breed. So there probably is a likelihood we could find some code on which everyone would be able to agree, but we haven't, I think, quite done that yet. And one reason for that is that religion stands in the way. I'm never going to subscribe to Muslim morality. And I don't think anybody should.
Yeah, I think secular people have just as much trouble disagreeing on morality as religious people, I believe, in my own experience.
They don't invent difficulties where none exist. They don't say... You said earlier about Dr. King, how it shows how adaptable... When I said how good it is he didn't take Exodus literally, you said, well, religion is marvelously adaptable. What you mean is that there is a human standard to which religion eventually had better conform if it wants to be thought moral. For example, the Jewish prayer is supposed to begin every day for a man. So before we start, I just want to thank God for making me a man and not a woman, and for not making me a Gentile. Right now, how many Jews do you know who really believe that? I know some who are very orthodox who do. Most Jews say, no, that's terrible. You know, in order to be moral, I have to forget what God asks me to do. Yeah. You'll find that's true across every religion.
Right, but as you said, you don't know many Jews like that in the modern world, even though it's a scripture that was once taken very seriously, which points to the
word of God, man. I mean, you can take it seriously or not.
Yeah, but you didn't need religion to make people tribalistic. Okay, you can go to hunter-gatherer societies who don't justify their hostility toward neighboring peoples by reference to the will of any particular God. People are just very good at tribalism, and when they're religious, it's manifested that way. And when they're, but it doesn't have to be.
And men are not bad at wanting to keep women as available chattel either, if they're left to themselves. Right. But to sanctify it with a divine warrant, wouldn't you say, makes those things worse? Poisons them, in fact. To say this is not me. If someone says this, he says, "I'm proposing today. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go and blow up an old people's home in Netanya on Passover. Why am I going to do this? It doesn't sound like a very recreational, moral way to spend your day. I'm doing it because God wants me to do it." I've mentioned this to you before. I mean, if a Greek American soldier blew himself up in his barracks or murdered his fellows, saying, I can't stand the fact that the United States policy is so pro-Turkish in NATO, you would not think that was a good enough reason, would you? But once it's been invested with the divine, everyone says, "Oh my God, we better take all this very seriously."
Yeah, but that's a good example.
That's the indulgence I want to withdraw from consideration of wickedness.
But you just gave us an example where the motivation is nationalistic and not religious, and I don't understand the argument you're making, if you are making it, that the fact of a religious justification makes a crime worse than it would otherwise be. To my mind, keeping women as chattel is as bad as it is. Whatever the justification is invalid, and I don't see how it being in a religious context makes it worse. Did I misunderstand you?
Well, only if you didn't get didn't agree with my observation that if these things are given divine warrant, that they're thereby strengthened. If you don't think giving them a divine warrant strengthens them, then of course we have no quarrel. But I think that a lot of people were prevented from seeing what was wrong about slavery because they said it was mandated in the Bible, which it is. I think I personally would have to say that I doubt whether the Roman Catholic Church's description of Jews as collectively, indefinitely responsible for deicide had nothing to do with the massacre of the Jews of Europe. I have a feeling that the two things are connected. I can't absolutely prove it, but I wouldn't trust any disproof either.
Here we have, ironically, I may be a better Marxist than you.
Well, I'm intrigued where he's going because about the Marxism thing, but I did just want to pause because we had a super chat from Mandy Sadowski who says, "Isn't religion to some extent similarly to white supremacy in people's thoughts and actions without even knowing it?" So, thoughts about that analogy?
I mean, I guess I'll sort of I could give like a kind of academic answer, depends how you define religion. I mean, I would say I would say not. I mean, I think there's like, I mean, well, one way is to say like there's sort of like religious overlaps with white supremacy in terms of historically, like the Ku Klux Klan or something like that is being being based in religion. I mean, I guess like what would you say that like a secular person who was a white supremacist like is in a way religious because they believed in white supremacy? I'm not sure. I mean,
yeah. So I think the idea, and it's a little, it's a little bit unclear to me, but I think the idea probably has something to do with our discussion earlier about like how to define religion and what, or I mean, again, as was pointed out in the chat, right? It's like, sure, I'm sure, if you ask a sociologist or an anthropologist, like I'm sure they wouldn't have any trouble giving you a definition of religion, but like how to define religion in the specific context of like what Hitchens means when he's critiquing religion, right? That maybe there's some sort of analogy here, between religious belief and the way that white supremacy can be people's thoughts and actions without even knowing it. I mean, part of the problems I think both halves are a little unclear. I mean, I kind of know what Mandy means because this is referencing sort of, the way people often talk about it. But like, I also think the way people often talk about white supremacy is a little, I don't know. I guess I'm going to use the word unclear one more time. Then I'm going to stop using it. But because I think that could mean a couple of different things, right? Like it could, and they're all real, but they're just different. You were talking about the KKK earlier, right? Like, so I know what you mean by like, if you're talking about like white supremacists, like I know what that means, and if white supremacy here is sort of a way of saying what might otherwise be said as like systemic or structural racism or something like that, then okay, I know a couple of things that can mean, and it's not always clear which one people are meaning to talk about, right, when they bring it up. Like one of them, one of them is like what somebody like Ibram X. Kendi, I know, will like insist on, which is that like it just means anything regardless of thoughts, right? That perpetuates inequality, between white people and black people, which and then another thing that it could mean is like the P plus P definition, right? Prejudice plus power. And I think that like the first one, which I actually think is, I mean, I'm not necessarily crazy about Kendi's formulation or whatever, but like I think the phenomenon is real, and and I actually think the first one is the much bigger social problem, which is just that like if you have like however many decades, of centuries, of legally discriminating against people and enslaving them, and then after that legally discriminating against them, then that's going to have long-term economic after effects without that requiring any conscious intent by anyone. That like even if all the racism was 100% gone, there was no more racial prejudice in the world today. Like if you didn't do any sort of redistribution of resources, that would still exist as an after effect of what existed before. But then the other is like racial prejudice by decision makers or something like that, which kind of sounds like from Mandy's formulation, that's what they mean. But and then I guess the idea is that you can have unconscious bias as well as conscious. I think I'm not sure what the analogy would be to the religious case. Like if you could be like unconsciously, religious,
I mean, I guess it could be. I mean, the analogy could be something like medieval Europe or something, where just everyone is Christian or something, or most people were, and that was like just sort of the water people swam in, one could say perhaps. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you could say that's similar to white supremacy today. I mean, one could say that. I suppose.
Yeah. By the way, I should say on that analogy that Alex Ryrie, do you know this guy? Have you ever seen his videos or anything?
Yeah, I think he's a historian of atheism. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So he has this fascinating video that like just the YouTube algorithm, fed me over the summer or something. Which I just looked it up. Here, I'll do the screen share so people can see. It's the how to. It's called How to Be an Atheist in Medieval Europe, and it's what he's and he's talking about like not that there's a ton of evidence one way or the other, but like what evidence exists from court records and stuff of what people who were atheists in medieval Europe like thought and and all that stuff, and it's a really fascinating thing because one of the things he points out in the video is that in that context where everybody in any sort of position of like being like a scholar or authority or anything like that was obviously a theist, that they would in that case, right? Like that, like he says people who do seem to have been atheists and would then hence like get in trouble with religious courts and stuff tended to, I mean, he has this like analogy. It's like almost like somebody who might like be just sort of like like some like barstool crank, who doesn't who doesn't believe that that I don't know, the earth is going around the sun because it doesn't look like it, like that, like they're like somebody who's just sort of like an uneducated, very independent-minded person who's like, nah, that kind of sounds wrong to me, which so it's like it's kind of a fun example for thinking about like, okay, is that person who's rejected everything that anybody who could be seen as an expert is saying in medieval Europe, right? Are they being rational to reject it, right? Or assuming the truth of atheism and all that stuff, right? Or are they being incredibly irrational and then just sort of lucked into the right answer?
Yeah. I think again, this might be too much of a tangent, but yeah, I think that is like a thing in medieval Europe. Like you get in like Inquisition records and so on, you come across like people who even might have just like drunkenly just said they don't believe that the host is actually Jesus or something like that. And then they get dragged in front of the Inquisition or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. So anyway, fun topic, but we stopped earlier than we were going to because we got the super chat. Let's watch some more of the debate.
Although you have a richer background in that belief system, where I just think that people create whatever ideological justification they need, ideology defined broadly to include religion, for what they are motivated to do by material, political, economic, self-interested, factors. And so there we just disagree, and there's probably no point in belaboring that argument.
I certainly, German imperialism wanted to take the property of the Jewish people of Germany and dispossess them of it. There's no question about that, and of other countries too. But the power of the anti-Semitic ideology on which they were able to draw came from generations of religious miseducation and lying about the Jews being an alien and evil people.
But isn't it worth noting that I'm sure you have to respond to this point all the time. No doubt you've got a great response, but isn't it notable that Hitler, and for that matter, the sponsors of pretty much all of the great atrocities of the 20th century, Stalin, Mao, and so on, seem not to have been theists.
Oh, to the contrary. I mean, Hitler's first political action was a concordat with the Vatican, which...
Well, he was a politician, of course. I mean, see, this is what I mean. You are so selective in when you decide to attribute cynicism to someone's use of religion, okay? In that case, the fact that he deployed religion for political purposes because he was a bad guy, you say reflected real religiosity.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Religion can be used to bad ends.
It's ridiculous to say that he was secular or atheist. Otherwise, why would the German army belt buckle have said God on our side? Why would
to inspire
I'll take
soldiers
a trivial point.
who were themselves religious,
I'll take a trivial point. Hitler's birthday was celebrated from the pulpits in Germany by order of the churches every year of his time.
Course, but that doesn't reflect on his own true religiosity.
Don't call him secular then. I only know of one place in official Europe. Now, I think there probably is only one where you can still see a swastika on a display. It's in the huge basilica near the Escorial outside Madrid. That is, among other places, where Franco is buried. It was built with slave labor from the Republican losers of the Civil War. There's a swastika on the ceiling when you look up to honor the German contribution to the victory of Catholic Spain over atheism. And there's also a German steel helmet in the mosaic. I'm sorry, you might not know this, but you irritate me and you potentially insult me by suggesting that my opinions are to be grouped with National Socialism. I won't have it, in other words.
Wait,
the guilt is on the other side.
Oh, you mean because I'm saying
secularism
that...
and atheism are not part of the hideous system of fascism, which, in my opinion, was mainly a product in Southern and Balkan Europe of the Catholic clerical right wing.
You take it as an affront to you personally and an indictment of you personally if I point to an atheist who has done something bad.
I'd say I don't like even the suggestion of it. I'm being as mild as I can.
And do you similarly exercise the restraint you're asking me to exercise by not suggesting in the presence of any religious person, including a very good one, that any other religious person has ever done anything bad? Are you similarly considerate of their feelings as you're asking me to be?
No, I'm not saying you mustn't hurt my feelings. I'm saying you ought to be aware that you're doing so. It looked to me as if you didn't realize that you were making. It looked to me as if you were, without knowing it. So I forgive you, making an insinuation.
So it's something that needs forgiving. Well, then when you do the comparable thing with religious people, does that need forgiving? Is that something that should be forgiven?
Well, the Catholic Church has tried and failed to apologize for its generations of anti-Semitism.
Christopher, don't change the subject. No, what I'm asking is this. I mean, this is really,
exactly where
this is such a typical debating point by you, okay?
I'm sorry. If there was nothing in what I said, the Vatican wouldn't have kept on trying to apologize for its years of anti-Semitic propaganda. I mean, it wasn't until 1964, nearly 30 years after the Nuremberg trials, 20 years after the Nuremberg trials, that they said that they no longer accused the Jewish people collectively of deicide.
Christopher,
I still don't think the apology is complete, but I can see the bad conscience that they must have about it. Now you say that's just political opportunism. The alliance between Hitler, Mussolini, Franco, Salazar, all the other dictators and the church. I say it's not. I say it's the product of a long period of telling people who might not otherwise have got the idea in every Mass, every Easter, that the Jewish people were their enemies. I think you can't do that and not expect bad behavior to be a consequence of it. And you just brushed it off and said, oh, well, people just make up ideologies to suit them. Actually, it wasn't very evolutionarily helpful for Jews to be driven out of Europe and murdered and their property taken. All societies that do that fall into ruin.
Christopher,
well, you said you were utilitarian.
Christopher, what point are you making? Who said it was?
Well, I'm saying your utilitarian point seems a bit thin in the face of that, doesn't it?
What?
But these things are just invented as and when.
Christopher, can I talk? Do utilitarians believe that everything that happens is for the good? Is that what you think a utilitarian is?
No. The utilitarian principle is most famously encapsulated as the greatest happiness for the greatest number.
That is what is to be desired, not what always happens. No. And I'm saying it's no less likely to happen under religious auspices than under secular auspices. I mean, these periods of history you're talking about are periods back when virtually everyone was religious. Pretty much every good thing and bad thing that happened was done by a religious person. But I just have to return to this silly point you brought up, where because I pointed to an atheist who'd done something bad, you turned around and made it sound like it was some inexcusable affront to you personally. And then I said, well, wait a second. When you do a comparable thing to a religious person, in the presence of a religious person, complain about some crime perpetrated by a religious person, should they be equally offended? And you went off on some weird tangent. I just don't, that's just a silly distraction. I mean, do you really think you should reasonably be?
I think you'll find that the digression is your fault. I said that I thought that a long religious preachment, in this case of anti-Semitism by Christianity, had terrible consequences. Had made good people behave badly in a very epoch-making way. And you appear to say in riposte that the main preacher of that evil, Adolf Hitler, was in some way of my way of thinking about religion. I had to say I thought that was A, wrong, and B, without becoming cheerful about it, more insulting than you might want to be. I mean, if you should either say if you think that Nazism is a version of secularism, if you think so, or not, but don't try and just imply it. As for taking offense, look, man, I mean, every day I have to listen to religious people saying that the teachings of Darwin are false, that Jews should be killed, that homosexuals are wicked, that women. I mean, if I was insulted by this kind of thing, if I took offense, I'd have no time to do anything else. It's they who say they have the right to threaten me with death for offending them who are the problem. Don't try and put me on all fours with that either, please.
Well, I'm flattered that you feel a need to distract us from the actual issues.
I don't know. I think that
raise.
was a digression, but I think you started it. But I think it was worth having.
Okay, so in the future, no one in a debate with you about whether religion is on balance a good thing or a bad thing, and by implication whether non-belief is more likely to be a good thing than a bad thing, will be allowed in your presence to point to anything an unbeliever has done that is bad. I can see how those debating rules would favor you, and I don't blame you for advocating them,
I will
Christopher.
put myself in the safekeeping of the people who watch this item.
You will be in good hands,
and I'll ask them to write in if they say that you have summarized my opinion
Christopher,
correctly.
You don't have to worry. I assure you that on this issue of religion, you have many more followers on this website than I have. I've done the empirical work.
It's not a matter of a vote.
The commenters will be overwhelmingly on your side, and if that's your primary goal in life, you have arrived.
No, I wouldn't say that it was. Anyway, I don't think that I should take any more time with this. I'll just put myself in the keeping of the audience and see if anyone thinks you summarized my opinion correctly.
Okay, so we can move on then?
Well, what choice do we have?
Okay, so let me give you one example. I take you to be saying that there's something inherently bad about the irrational influence of religion, and I would like to move the subject soon to the question of how should we confront, what strategically should we do about.
I just wanted to say about that point. I sort of feel like Hitchens' point would have been a lot easier just to say, like, to point out like all the religious aspects of Nazism and stuff, without getting into like the sort of like offended thing. I mean, yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right. It is. Somebody in the chat, referred to him as a messy bitch during that part, and like you can sort of see what they mean. As the man himself might have put it. He likes to do that sometimes. The sort of sir, that is offensive. You should apologize now. It very rarely feels like it adds anything, at least to me, and I think that like it also like gives Wright a good opening to just be like, wait a second, like what are the ground rules here? Like because like I'm I'm not even saying that like this stuff should be like blamed on secularism. I'm just saying that I think it complicates your claim that that religion is the is the sort of leading cause of stuff like this. And and I think that Hitchens does have an okay case. I'm not sure about a great case, but an okay case, to make on this point, and that he does make it elsewhere, which is just roughly that like that a lot of European fascism was very tied in, especially to like the right wing of the Catholic Church, and that's like a really close connection, and lots of especially in the the Franco case that like it, but like lots of other cases too, so that would be fair enough, although it's also like, okay, I'm not sure his going straight to Hitler was the best tack there, because it seems like Hitler was pretty obviously making like a cynical political calculation, by making this deal with the church. Like, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm not super up on what exactly Hitler's personal religious views were, but it seems like, if I had to guess, he's probably ultimately somewhere in between, what would now be called spiritual but not religious, and being like some sort of weird pagan or something.
Yeah. I think that I'm not totally super informed, I guess, about that question, but I mean, it does seem like at least you can say he's not sort of unambiguously an atheist or a secular person.
I think that's right, but I think he's probably also not unambiguously a Christian.
No, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm actually being genuinely curious about this. If anybody has like really good evidence about exactly what Adolf Hitler's religious beliefs were, but like it just seems like, okay, is he, the fact that he made this deal, the Concordat with the Catholic Church, I mean, like, calling it that, right, is already an analogy to Napoleon's deal with the Catholic Church, and Napoleon was certainly not, like anything like a, believing, Catholic. Like it just that just seems like politics. Like I think it's one thing to say that. I mean, I think Hitchens' case is stronger if he's emphasizing that the church was on the wrong side. I think that's just true. Like, that the Catholic Church was in bed with these fascist regimes for the most part. But that's a little bit different from saying that the regimes themselves, certainly in the German case, are like unambiguously motivated, by, Christianity. I mean, like, again, he could even say, and he did say earlier, to be fair, in this discussion, that like Christianity is also culpable in a sort of larger sense, because of the sort of centuries of nurturing anti-Semitism, and that all of that's certainly fair, right? But like going straight to like, well, Hitler made this deal with the Catholic Church, so therefore this one's on Christianity, especially after like not half an hour ago, he was like, well, I don't know what Martin Luther King's,
right.
personal
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. I think, just to say that I think there's a book by the historian's name is Richard Steigman Gall. I don't know how. Anyway, I think it's called like Holy Reich, something like that. It just came out in the past couple of years, I think.
Here we go.
Yeah.
The Holy Reich, Nazi Conceptions of Christianity, 1919 to 1945 by Richard Steigman Gall. That's the dude.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I mean, it seems like it definitely on topic anyway. Yeah,
fair enough. All right, let's watch a little bit more.
Cases where undeniably religion has become intertwined with bad and does help motivate people to do bad, which I certainly don't deny. But first, I just want to clarify the meaning of your subtitle. and your position on the intrinsic badness of the irrational influence of religion. I just want to give you a case where I think the irrational influence of religion was good, and let me know, A, if you agree, B, if you find that inconsistent with your thesis. I was raised a Southern Baptist, and in El Paso, Texas, in the early '60s. This is around the time that the Civil Rights Act was being passed, and it was, Texas was certainly not the state where it was most popular. And there I was, a 7 or 8 year old or something, subject to the irrational influence of the Southern Baptist Church. And what was going on in that church was that every week in Sunday school, we sang the song "Jesus Loves You," which includes the words Jesus loves the little children, which includes the words red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in His sight. And I cannot imagine that did not reinforce in my mind the idea that black people are just as valuable morally as white people. It reinforced it in an irrational way. It wasn't like a logical argument. It was drawing.
All right, just want to pause for half a second to say that if I were making the case that Wright is making and I were arguing with Christopher Hitchens, I would not use the Southern Baptists, as an example, because it seems pretty straightforward what he's going to say to this.
Mm.
Okay, come on, it's nice that they sang that song, but if we're talking about overall influence relative to the topic, which I'm sure is at least how Hitchens is going to interpret it, is the Southern Baptist Church's overall track record on race, more bad than good?
Right. Yeah.
On my irrational devotion at that time to God, it seems to me that was a positive effect of religion, and I think I could point to many others, not to mention all the people working in soup kitchens under religious inspiration and so on. But A, do you deny that's an example of the good use?
No, not at all, any more than I would deny. I mean, some people appear to say that if it wasn't for their belief in God, they wouldn't be giving money, say, to charities in Africa. Okay. I mean, I find it an alarming admission. They say it's because I'm a Christian that I do it. And I say, what, if you lost your faith, you'd stop caring about Africans? I never quite understand that. But let's say, I grant it happily, that some people make that their reason, and perhaps it gives them additional motivation. I'm quite content. I take them at their word. My challenge on this point is the following. I'm sure I've tried it on you before. If I haven't, I'll try it on you now. You have to name a moral action or an ethical statement made by someone of faith or because of their faith that couldn't be made by me as an unbeliever. You won't be able to find one. And if you're telling me that without that verse, you would have thought, well, it's Jesus loves the children. In itself, a meaningless statement. But surely that doesn't mean black children. If you're saying otherwise, you might have thought that. I leave it to you to say so, but I really doubt it. I mean, the corollary to my point, by the way, the corollary question, find a moral or ethical statement that an unbeliever couldn't make or perform, is think of a bad thing done or said by a believer because of their religion. Now you've immediately thought of one, and so has everyone who's watching this. But I love these games. For example, the Reverend Bailey Smith, some big mouth idiot who was Jerry Falwell's deputy, once made an anti-Semitic statement that I thought was true. Shall I tell you what it is?
Sure.
God doesn't hear the prayers of a Jew, he said. I couldn't agree more. I don't think God does hear the prayers of a Jew or anyone else. Right. So you can, if you're a religious person, make a ridiculous statement that is consistent with some of the rules of rationality, but it's more likely to be a coincidence, I'd say, than anything else.
So you asked me if I could name a moral belief held by a religious person that could not be held by a secular person.
Moral action taken or statement made, yes.
And can you name for me an immoral action taken by a secular person that could not be taken by a religious person?
No, I think I'd have to accept that would be.
And my point is sustained.
But we don't say that our morality is necessarily superior. We simply say that the reliance on the supernatural is superfluous at best, and can lead to wicked things. I've already instanced that you refuse to take me up on it. Centuries of Christian preaching against the Jews, which I said. In the end, that was going to lead to evil. And you didn't take me up on it then, and you haven't since. You said, oh, well, that kind of thing could happen anywhere. I don't think so. It's a
No,
long inculcation of simple people with evil falsehoods in the name of a religion.
Now, religious doctrine does have some enduring effect. I'm not the most simplistic kind of, Marxist in that sense or materialist in that sense. I would just say that, back in those days, all good and bad things resulted from religion. Now, back when everyone was religion, all the good stuff and bad stuff was justified. When everyone was religious, all the good stuff and bad stuff was justified by religion. And yes, I do believe, by and large, most of the bad stuff was motivated fundamentally not by the religion, although justified in those terms. This is an almost metaphysical debate. I don't think there's any point in carrying it on a lot further.
Oh, I know I'd like to go on with it a little longer. By the way, since it's the second time you've mentioned Karl Marx, I think you may have noticed in my book, I quote what he actually did say about religion. Most people say that he denounced it just as an opiate. And I quote what he says. It's from the introduction to his critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. He says, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, the spirit of a spiritless situation. And then he says it can be an opiate for the people. And he goes on to say, criticism of religion has plucked the flowers from the chain, and not in order that men and women may wear the chain without consolation, but so that they may break the chain and cull the living flower. Now, I perfectly understand why people have a need for the numinous, you might say, or the transcendent, the things that are part of our emotions that are not completely quantifiable, to do with music, poetry, love, landscape, and so forth. There's no question that these are essential for us, almost as much as food and drink is. But there's no need to postulate anything supernatural about them. I think that, in fact, they're enjoyed better if they don't come as gifts from someone who wants something back from you.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. One final point on this: is religion good or bad? Where I would say essentially neither. It's about equally capable of both. But you, in your book, you recount this question. I guess Dennis Prager confronted you with, where he said, "Admit it. If you're walking down the street, it's dark, and there's nobody else. You see a stranger approaching out of the shadows. Could be, would you rather be a religious person or not a religious person?" Yes. Right? And your reply was, as I recall, what country did you pick? Where if you were in
well, I said
Lebanon,
he said you had to imagine you're in a strange country, a strange town, where you don't know anybody. This happens. It's evening's coming on, and you see a group of men coming towards you. Do you feel better or worse if you know they're coming from a prayer meeting? And I said, well, just without leaving the letter B, I've had that experience in Belfast, Beirut, Baghdad, Bombay. There's another B I'm not coming up with. Those four will do. And believe me, you don't want to be around when the church is let out in those places, or the mosques. You don't.
Oh, come on.
Well, I can't say that what I said.
Well, what I was curious about was, honestly, if you did the thought experiment in the average American city, say you're in a part of town that could be a little dicey, all you know is whether that person is religious or not. Honestly, you would say in a part of town that's known to be dangerous and pervaded by crime, you would say, I would rather it be the not religious person in an American context?
Well, in a civilized secular society with police force and enforceable laws and so on, I don't think it really makes very much difference. So I wouldn't want it to be the Nation of Islam's church, for example. No, but I mean, I think
that would be unlikely.
In a country that has managed to put religion under some kind of discipline and control, no, it doesn't apply. But look, there's a tautology involved in what both of us are saying, actually. When you say, well, people do bad things, but that's when everyone was religious, so everything, good or bad, was religious. And I say, well, I think religion has done some things that it would have taken a belief in God and supernatural permission to turn into wickedness. I still say that since religion is man-made, it is, if you like, also a secular product. But there is nothing more likely to intensify existing criminal, selfish, racist, enslaving, rapists, genital mutilation tendencies, suicidal and mass murdering tendencies, than the belief that you have a divine permission to do this. And the fact that that is a man-made invention, it can't be a divine permission in my worldview, doesn't get you off the hook. I say it's religion that poisons everything.
Well, actually,
belief that you have a special right because you say you have faith.
I think we've uncovered instances where you don't think it poisons everything. Like when I was singing that song in Sunday school, I don't think you thought I was the subject of a poisonous bad thing at that point.
I would say, I said, if you remember, I said it makes good people do bad things. And I added, and I hope you won't take this personally, that it makes it makes intelligent people say dumb things. If you're telling me that on singing a ditty, it says that Jesus loves all the children, and this must mean black kids, that had a real effect on your mind, I'll have to take your word for it. But I mean, I can't believe that such a thing was necessary for you. And I think you do yourself no favor.
I was 8 years old. I guarantee you it did. It was the I would say benign use of the indoctrination of a child.
Well, then you're going to have to accept all the Christian churches that said there are no black people allowed into this church, and God separated the sons of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
No. You see, again,
you have to accept them. If you're going to take credit for one, my dear, you have to accept the responsibility for the rest.
Christopher,
and I'm sorry, I actually don't really believe your story. I don't think that came as a revelation to you, because there's no such person as Jesus. He has no particular attitude towards children, except he thinks people should leave their families and follow him.
They didn't stress that. And I would say, by
the way, denominating those children by color in the hymn is a bad idea to begin with. So, but why not just say he likes all the children, even though he didn't?
Christopher, when you say I have to accept the bad with good, do, because remember, I'm not arguing that religion is more good than bad. You're the person with the burden of
I'm
showing.
not clear to see what it is you are
and this explains why you're straining in these cases. Well, you're the one with the burden of showing that religion always has bad effects.
My burden actually isn't that. My burden is that everybody knows what I think and also how, and I keep saying it again and then giving, I think, ever more beautiful and elegant illustrations of it. But it's very difficult to argue with someone whose position is not disclosed. You don't tell me whether you think religion makes people behave better or not. You don't. You have said you don't believe in the supernatural, but I'm not clear what you do think. You don't have to think anything, but it's very difficult to go around with you when I don't know what your views are.
Oh, I've tried to be as clear as I can. I think that in both my book Non-Zero and my book The Evolution of God, I've argued that there is a moral direction to history along at least one dimension. And I won't get into it even to bother explaining what the dimension is. B, I think that it has some of the hallmarks of purpose in a way that doesn't necessarily imply the existence of a conscious designer, intelligent being, God. Could be that there's a God who set it all in motion in a kind of deistic way, but my view of history itself is materialistic and doesn't appeal to intervention or anything. In any event, I believe that there is a moral direction to history that helps me orient my life, and in that way provides some of the sustenance that religion provides for people. So maybe I'm religion.
Yes.
Just want to take a second to say that Wright is not doing a good job of answering this question because he's answering it by circling back to like everything that he thinks that's sort of vaguely related to the topic. And maybe if you wanted to do that after, it would be okay. But, given the fact that Hitchens is, I don't know how much of it's because they, because they like had just done their foreign policy debate before this. And this is like 3 hours into arguing, or whether Hitchens is doing so many of these things at this point that they all blur together for him or what. But I mean, I think Hitchens probably, should know more than he seems to what Wright's position is. But I don't know, it seems like Wright could just say, my position is that I don't think that, I don't think religion, is good overall. I don't think it's bad overall. I think, and then, fill in however he's going to fill in the third sentence, but like, given the basicness of the thing that Hitchens is not getting about his position here, it just seems like doing like 5 paragraphs of like his larger beliefs, is probably not the best approach here.
Yeah. I mean, I do feel like, sometimes Hitchens is like debating Wright as if he does believe in theism or whatever. And I think, I mean, I feel like perhaps it was necessary for him to sort of make that clear that that wasn't his position.
Yeah, no, that is true. That there have been a few points where it's like, did Hitchens just forget that like he's not doing one of his debates with like pastors or something, you know, because like he is responding to some of this as if, right, you know, he's like, oh, well, you know, you, sir, have wronged me by saying that it was my side that, you know, that did the Holocaust, or, you know, you've you know, are you really saying that you would have been a racist if not for, you know, whatever, like all of these things seem like he's occasionally just sliding into debating him as if Wright were one of the people that he's arguing with like 95% of the time that he's doing religion debates.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's true. Do you want to say something about the thing like Hitchens was saying earlier, like which he does in every debate, the thing about like the moral action that a religious or a secular person can do that a religious can't do? Is that how it goes?
Yeah. So the challenge is always, he loves this. Like he brings this out. Like, you know, he does this in like 100 debates. It's could you name a moral action or statement that couldn't be performed, or that could be performed or said by a religious person but couldn't be performed or said by a non-religious person? And then the second one is, could you name a morally wicked, you know, action or statement that could be, you know, done or said by a religious person, but that couldn't be done or said by a non-religious person? And the idea is supposed to be that like the first one's a stumper, but the second one's really easy because, you know, you could just, you know, everybody will be able to come up with it, you know, right away because, you know, whatever, flying planes into buildings or, you know, whatnot, right? So, I've always thought this was kind of a sloppy way of saying what it seems like maybe he's trying to say when he says that, because for one thing, it seems like, I mean, you know, to give the devil his due, I mean, this is Doug Wilson's point, you know, when he's arguing about this, that it does seem like which things are moral or immoral is going to be somewhat a dispute, you know, between between the sides, right? I mean, like if you think, you know, if you think that, I don't know, if you think that abortion is murder and, you know, and it's, you shouldn't, and that like homosexuality is a sin and you shouldn't sanctify, you know, whatever, right? You know, like that, like there could be things that lots of people might have religious reasons for thinking are wrong. That, you know, it is that, you know, that a secularist would be more likely to do. And it's also a little unclear, like that is a little weird too, because it's like, well, anybody could do anything, right? Like, is the question, like, is the question, you know, presumably what he means is, would they? And even there, right? Like, it's, I mean, I don't know, sometimes, right? You know, like but I guess it, you know, he must mean something like, either can you think of a statement or action that's morally good that a religious person would be more likely to do than a non-religious person, or else he maybe means like that it would be inconsistent for either the religious person or the non-religious person to do. I don't know. How do you read that?
I think it's that. Well, I mean, one could say like, well, you know, religious people would give to charity and they would do it based on their religion. But then Hitchens would say, well, a secular person could also give to charity. And it's the same sort of reasoning. But yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Like it comes down to like, what do you mean by morality? Like what is like a moral action? I mean, obviously that's in the dispute since people disagree about that. But I think,
I mean, look, if demons are real, then and exorcism works, then performing an exorcism is a morally exemplary action that you would only perform if you were religious.
Yeah, right. Yes, right. Yeah, but Robert Wright, like he says some like counter thing about. I tried to write it down, but I'm not sure if I even caught it. Something about like could you say an immoral action taken by a secular person that couldn't be taken by a religious person? I think that's what he said, although I'm not sure.
Yeah, so I think Wright messed it up a little bit, because what he ended up, I don't think what he said is what he meant to say, because I think what he said is actually the thing that Hitchens standardly includes in his challenge, is the second half. And so of course Hitchens was like, yes, of course, but I think he was trying to turn it around in some way, right? Like to be like, can you think of a morally wicked action that a non-believer is more likely to do, than a believer? And it seems like the answer should still be yes, right? I mean, like, because not only because, I mean, like, even objectively, yes, right? Like, I mean, if you
there would be an action that a secular person could take that would be immoral, that they would be more likely to do that than a religious person.
Yeah, I mean, like there got to be a few, right? I mean, like if you, I don't know, like what about like the people in like the Norwegian like black metal bands who would burn down churches, right? Like that's surely something that you're more likely to do if you're not religious.
That's true. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
So I think it's a poorly conceived thing. And I also think it's even true that like, I mean, again, a lot depends on how you interpret it, because, again, the could is just super weird here. Like, sure, people could do and sometimes do things that are like weird and inconsistent with their beliefs and all the time, right? Like that's not that interesting. But if the question, if you interpret it as, is there something that you're more likely to do, that's morally good? I don't know. I mean, I think that there might be some things that are morally good that people might be more likely to do if they're believers. Like, like I think certain kinds of acts of, I mean, I think certain kinds of acts of like extreme charity, right? Like the sort of, I'm going to, like I remember the example that Larry Taunton brings up, is that I guess like Taunton and his wife like adopted a HIV positive little girl from Ukraine, and they did that because they were sort of like it does seem like sometimes if you're sort of thinking about it, like even though I don't think there's any like logical relationship between religious belief and and any particular moral, any particular action that I would agree is morally good, right? That like I do think probably just psychologically, if your sense of the sort of feelings that you have when you're doing religion, the sort of sense of awe and transcendence and and all that stuff are hooked up to your thinking about whether to do some extreme moral action, then like maybe you are more likely to do that thing for good or ill, right? Like that doesn't seem crazily implausible to me. And it's not, of course, that there aren't atheists who do stuff like that. I mean, there are, but like, I could buy that it would be more likely. I mean, like, I think that, I mean, look, I know, there's somebody who I knew when I was, at Rutgers in person who's an atheist, as far as I know, but who gave, like she gave a kidney to a, just as like a donation, like just to the pool, right? Like not to anyone in particular, right? But just like she knows that there's a shortage of kidneys and she's healthy and she gave a kidney, right? Like that's something. And so that would be a non-religious example. That's something that presumably she was doing because she was like reading bioethics papers all the time and, and thinking about the issue. So I don't think religion is like unique in that it can like motivate people to engage in acts of moral heroism that most people wouldn't do. But I could buy that religion is a thing that can play some role in motivating people to acts of moral heroism that, that most people, that people might otherwise, not do. And I mean, again, I don't know really understand what any of this is supposed to prove, because it's like,
yeah, right, yeah,
yeah.
It doesn't get more true if that's right. That
yeah. No, exactly right. And it's
mm-hmm.
and so not only is it totally irrelevant to the metaphysical question of whether these like claims are true or not, or even the ethical question, right, of whether like we can make sense of morality better or whatever. Like it's not even, it's relevant to, but I don't think it's dispositive of the sort of question of whether whatever the sort of stripped down, more plausible version is of saying religion poisons everything. Like, like, like the question of like, okay, does religion cause more good or harm in the world? Right. It's relevant to that, but it's not certainly not enough to settle it. Right. Cause it's like, yeah, like I could buy that, that maybe even like, just like, maybe even that like religious people are more likely than non-religious people to volunteer at soup kitchens. We could just make it something as mundane as that. Right. Okay. That's probably true. On the other hand, right, religious people are much more likely than non-religious people to like send their gay kids to conversion therapy. Right. Like, so right. I don't know how many, I mean, are we doing like a utilitarian calculation here?
Right,
like,
right.
How many soup kitchens make up for a conversion therapy clinic? Or,
yeah.
I have no idea how we'd even start to like try to figure out what the balance was.
Yeah, I think there probably is something to be said, like Robert Wright's example of the like the song when he was 8 about like racial tolerance or whatever. I mean, I think there is something about like instructing kids with morals and stuff. Like, I don't think they just learn it like on their own. I mean, like Hitchens seems to be saying. But anyway, I mean, like, I guess you could say like, religion has some kind of social utility, but if the sort of underlying basis of it wasn't true, then you can't really put forward these moral teachings based on something isn't true, I guess. If you see what I mean.
Sorry, say the last part again.
Just that, like, you couldn't say like, okay, I know that this is a false belief, but nonetheless, like, I think it's useful to teach it to people. I mean, you couldn't really do that, like in genuinely do that. I don't think, like, knowing it's false, but nonetheless, like, thinking it's useful.
Yeah, there are certainly people who've had that position. That I mean, I think, pretty explicitly in some cases. I remember, I think like Leon Trotsky's memoir, My Life. He has, I don't remember. There's like some like Russian aristocrat before the revolution who's quoting, like as telling him that like, no, I don't think God exists, but it's good for the people to have a religion, right? That I mean, I'm sure there have been lots of people who've held that position. I mean, it's a little bit of it's a weird position to hold, right? Because it's like, okay, well, do you think that you're not believing it makes you a worse person? If you don't, like, what's so special about you that like other people couldn't believe it without being bad?
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Bad on the timeline, but A+ joke. Red says, I fast forwarded to the Frida Kahlo chapters. All right, let's watch some more.
Religious, even though I'm agnostic on the question of whether there's some being behind it all. That, in a nutshell, that's my position.
But it could or could not be the case. Well, I mean, I don't quarrel with that, but it's hard to argue with. I think, by the way, if you care, of course, I've looked at your book about the evolution of God, and I should tell you, I mean, I've had I say it in my book as well. I mean, the hardest thing for me to give up when I stopped thinking like a socialist, not entirely stopped thinking like a Marxist, when I found I couldn't make it match observable reality anymore. The hardest thing to give up is teleology, is the idea that the future can be better or or will be, or simply in some way ought to be, that we are on, that our own evolution is an upward curve rather than a blip. It's very, very difficult for a human being to give that up. But if you think what you just say you thought,
I have not given it up.
The collapse of European civilization into barbarism in the 20th century and the enormous role played by religious superstition in that collapse, the Counter-Reformation, the Crusade, the number of times that civilization was on the march in Europe and was retarded terribly by faith, by the Inquisition, by the Crusades. It makes it to be absolutely impossible for you to say that religion has been anything more than slightly modified in its barbarism by the achievements of science and by the exercise of ordinary humanistic morality.
Well, first of all, although my belief is that religion does about as much good as bad, my argument about teleology doesn't presuppose that at all. They're unrelated. And so I don't want to bore you with it, but they're just not relevant.
You mean the evolution part has nothing to do with your belief in the innate goodness or badness? That seems to be a hard separation to impose upon yourself, but that would be your choice.
I didn't hear you say.
Anyway, how is it to be quantified? I mean, for example, if I say what I'm sure of, which is that millions and millions of children's lives have been stunted and poisoned, to coin a phrase, by being told they're going to go to hell if they play with themselves or if they become Protestants or, as the case might be, Catholics. I mean, but there's no way of quantifying how much harm, how much misery that's done, is there? I mean, you can sometimes do body counts of things like the 30 Years' War and so forth, but it's very, very crude. We don't have a means of quantifying the evil that a religion has done.
It's very hard. It's very hard to quantify the good. Now, in your book, you generally ignore the good and only focus on the evil, so it's extremely hard to do it in that circumstance. But you know, I waited too long to get to a subject I think we should at least glancingly touch on, because it's my motivation really for challenging your claim that religion is I think an overwhelmingly universally bad thing, or however you would put it, which is that I think it leads you to a very counterproductive view on foreign policy. It leads you to think that the enemy of good is religion per se, that the source of conflict and terror is so often religion per se, as opposed to underlying circumstances that I think give rise to it. An example I often use is Israel-Palestine, where I think you would agree with me that as an historical matter, the tension there, the conflict there, began in a pretty secular context, right? I mean, the subsequent religious radicalization on both sides is indeed subsequent. And what seems to be the prime mover here is an argument over land.
No, I mean, actually, I'd like to share the premise with you, but I can't, because the claim in the first place, but admittedly, it was a fairly secular Zionist movement that Herzl founded, but the claim that they were returning to the land is a claim to land that is supposedly awarded to them by God, who neither you nor I believe is involved in real estate. The opposition to it would have certainly been there if all the Palestinians were atheists. They wouldn't have wanted a Jewish colonization or any other kind.
Right.
But as it happens, it's made impossible to solve by the opposite claim that, yes, God does give land. Of course, we agree with Zionists and rabbis about this. It's just that it's Muslim land. It's part of the lost Ottoman Muslim Caliphate. And of course, no Jews or unbelievers are allowed there. So what could have been, if it was a territorial dispute solved with a two-state solution that the majority of people want a long time ago, is made completely insoluble precisely by not the deists, but the theists, the people who don't just believe in God, they believe God takes their side.
But you got to remember, I mean, you say that the original Zionists appealed to the Bible. That's true, but they were essentially secular. They appealed to it as an historical document.
Which it isn't. That's the last thing.
Well, no, of course it's not. But the point is, they didn't. Their argument was not, by and large, this proves that God wants us to be here. It was, damn it, we were here first. The kind of argument that secular people can have. And in fact, a very conscious decision was made in the founding documents of Israel to make no appeal, if you read the Hebrew, as opposed to some of the translations, to make no appeal to divine sanction.
Excuse me, Robert, the Bible does not say they were there first. They had to clear out everyone else who lived there, the Canaanites.
Well, they were there before the Arabs.
Well,
there are no Canaanites in the fight today, okay?
Earlier doesn't give you any any special right.
Well, that's the way it was. That's the way it was deployed. These
Well,
were
at
not
any
people
rate,
who were
whether you know it or
invoking
not,
divine sanctions.
whether you know it or not, you're still making my point. Everything they do, they justify either by the Bible as either the word of God or a historical document, and you and I both know it's neither.
As an historical document.
What?
Yeah. They were appealing to it as an historical document.
Yes, but it isn't a historical document any more than it's the word of God, unless you disagree. And you don't think that's exacerbated the situation?
No, I think it was false history, but my point is their motivation was not religion. They, again, as people do, they found whatever convenient was convenient in the way of text or justification.
So the Jewish settlers who moved to the West Bank and steal other people's land are doing it because they think they have a historical claim. Is that what you're really saying?
Wait, what did you just, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry.
The Jewish settlers who moved to the West Bank, steal other people's land and build colonies on it, that now amount to the size of suburbs, are doing it because they say they have a properly legalized historical claim. You know very well that's not what they say.
No, I didn't say that. I said it indeed as the conflict festered, it became less nationalist and more religious. But the idea that the religion is the underlying cause is a mistake. The religious belief is now a big problem. I don't deny that.
Amazing that it should come from nowhere.
What?
Amazing that it should come from nowhere. Suddenly they're all religious in Jerusalem? I mean, you said it. I mean, I just have to, I don't feel I have to comment on that.
They're not all religious in Jerusalem, but you're right that that the more problematic settlers are.
Yes. Well, if you think the quarrel over the Holy Land is secular, I'm perfectly, I mean, in one way I'm willing to agree with you, because after all human conflicts are secular. There is no God who takes sides. People who think that he does or she does or it does are indeed dreaming. All conflicts are non-religious, if you want. I'll happily say that. The statement there is no God is as meaningless as the statement that there is one, because the entity under discussion is meaningless. But I said religion, not God. Okay. Now religion which is at the root of the original quarrel, has also made it insoluble, is making it insoluble. These people, if you look at their propaganda, Jewish and Muslim, what they want is for the world to come to an end. They see in this the sign that they can bring on the Messiah.
The way this emphasis on the intrinsically, I would say, almost autonomously bad role of religion is used by your compatriot Sam Harris, and you may or may not agree with him, is to say, as he has said explicitly, do not bother looking for material circumstances that motivate, that underlie violent Palestinian resistance or terrorism, because it's just religion. Now, obviously, the implication of that is don't bother stopping the settlements. Don't bother even messing with things on the ground. And this is what most bothers me. And maybe you don't share Sam's view here, but this is what most bothers me about such an exclusive, and I would say misleadingly exclusive, emphasis on religion as the source of all evil.
Well, I don't know if that's what he says about Palestine or about the roots of Islamist violence in general, but I'm sure he wouldn't say the settlements had nothing to do with it. And he certainly wouldn't do what not even you were willing to say, and say the settlements are not to do with religion. On the broader question, I don't think it's true, for example, that bin Ladenism, whatever you want to call it, jihadism, is created by poverty and unemployment. No, I know it's the cause of a lot of poverty and unemployment. In fact, it's the deliberate cause of a lot of poverty and unemployment, because that's the ground in which they hope to operate. The blowings up of the hotels in Indonesia, for example, greatly reduced the national income of an already very poor country. It isn't the product of unemployment and poverty, it's the cause of it. You'll find that's consistent across the board. Afghanistan was reduced to beggary by the Taliban. So there's an always wonderfully congruent coexistence between extreme religiosity, poverty, disease, ignorance, illiteracy, and superstition. But that's the stew we're actually dealing with. However, I think people who say, I'm going to kill you, it's my friend Fleming Rose, for example, who's the editor of a newspaper in Denmark, an Al-Qaeda cell in Chicago, Illinois, has been found to have been helping to plot the death of an editor of a newspaper in Democratic Open Society of Denmark. You're telling me they're doing that because they feel that their wage packet has shrunk? Come on.
No. My own emphasis is really not on poverty, but it is on various material circumstances. And I'll link to the piece in which I quote Sam Harris saying, I think, don't bother to look for this, or any other such variable. We'll link, and if I'm wrong, we'll see that I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure he holds that. If you don't find, then I would consider you more enlightened.
Well, then, no, I mean, I'm a very great admirer of Dr. Harris, and I'll give you an example of, without consulting him or having read his stuff, the government of Gaza is currently run by Hamas, a ruthlessly Islamist party which publishes the protocols of the Elders of Zion, an anti-Jewish fabrication, on its website, and calls for the destruction of all Jewish people and for the total Islamization of Palestine. Now, these people have been told if they'll drop saying these things, the embargo imposed on them by the United Nations and others, and the European Union, will be lifted. They'll be able to get building permits. They'll be able to have all kinds of construction and aid. The floodgates of help will open for people of Gaza. But they won't do that. That's not a price. They'll keep people in Gaza in poverty and misery and fear because they will not give up their religious fanaticism.
Well, you know what that's an example of to me? It's the way governing elites in general often sacrifice the welfare of their people. I would make a comparable argument about the relatively secular leadership in the West Bank of the Palestinian people. There are things they could be doing, but it would threaten the supply of money to them, and they're not justifying it in terms of religion, but it's still happening because elites are elites, and they're often bad. But, as long as we're on the subject of Sam Harris, the one final, we're running over time, but finally, I said this to kind of you and Sam in Mexico when we had this debate in Puebla, which I guess we can link to. I mean, it was such a multi-party debate that people should not go there for the thrill of mano-a-mano combat. But
No, indeed.
But I said to Sam, I think I don't think I'm caricaturing your view when Sam's view especially, but I think yours is. What we have to do, the priority has to be, expunge religion from the planet. And I said, so I think, Sam, your view is that if we will run up to these Muslim extremists who are terrorists or who may be amenable to that or maybe leaning that direction, grab them, shake them, and say, don't you understand? Your God doesn't exist. I think Sam's view seems to be that's a productive thing to do. I beg to differ. And it's, again, because I think religion is not intrinsically bad, and many of these people who have not yet made the leap to terrorism will not necessarily make it, but they're more likely to make it like all religious people of all persuasions, they're more likely to be fundamentalist if they feel threatened. So leaving aside the merits of the case, I don't think it's tactically a productive strategy.
Well, I don't know of any instance of Dr. Harris going to the region and telling Muslims they must give up their religion, which is all nonsense anyway. He's been pursuing his career in neuroscience and building up a wonderful website called Reason, on which you can access almost all the debates and texts about the debates and debates about the texts of religion since human history began. So what you say isn't even...
Gotta say, I do often wonder what he would have thought about Sam Harris if he'd beaten cancer in 2011 and seen Harris's evolution over the course of all that time since then, at least assuming that this counterfactual Harris would have evolved the same way.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's true. But I wonder if Hitchens would have also gone down a sort of similar anti-woke path. I'm not sure. Yeah.
It's possible. I think I'm sure he would have been like fairly anti-woke actually. Like I think that's like near certainty. Like whatever else is like unclear about what his politics would have been. By now. I mean, I think just given a lot of things about his personality, it's hard to imagine him not at least being annoyed by some of the same cultural trends that inspire all of that. But I don't know. It's like I guess one thing I do think of is like Harris's well, I guess two things that come to mind, right, are Harris's like weird thing like a couple of years ago where he got really into defending, you know, Charles Murray. And like Hitchens was like pretty contemptuous of like maybe anybody who like made a big deal about IQ, you know. I mean, he thought it was kind of pseudoscience. Like he talks about that in a couple of places. Like he's got a great essay. I think it might be quoted in Against the Web, but anyway, he's got a great essay. I think like Vanity Fair, you know, the 90s or something, making fun of Mensa. And he's got one. And he's got like a column in The Nation about the death penalty where he's like, you know, I mean, he was extremely anti-death penalty, but like he's sort of objecting to the Supreme Court ruling, you know, about, you know, the death penalty and mental disability, because you're like, oh, whether you're executed or not is going to depend on, you know, whether you pass, you know, like what your score is on an IQ test, you know, like, but that's just silly nonsense, right? So like, I think that might have been an issue. And then I think the other thing that again, I mean, in the world where Hitchens was still alive, maybe this wouldn't have happened anyway, but like the part of Harris's trajectory that I have the hardest time, like, is the you know, the intellectual dark web stuff like that that Harris is hanging out with like Jordan Peterson and, you know, Ben Shapiro.
Yeah, that's true. I guess Sam Harris has recently kind of said
himself, right?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I feel like with Hitchens that he's always like, he's such a, I mean, he is a contrarian, so like he wouldn't be comfortable, I guess. Like he may dislike the woke people, but he wouldn't really be comfortable being lumped in with these other kind of anti-woke people, perhaps. I mean, so I don't know.
Yeah. I think there's a good chance that's right. I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, it's so hard to say, but I mean, I think that, like, I mean, certainly, I mean, the reason that I think that he would have like disliked sort of wokeness in the culture is just like, I mean, it's just impossible to imagine Christopher Hitchens live into 2021 and like not saying something in, you know, Slate or Vanity Fair or whatever that like caused like some, you know, eruption of outrage that he would have responded to by like severely doubling down. Because
that's true. Yeah,
there would have been like 5 things like that would have happened by now. You know, so that's why I think that as far as like what he would have thought about the anti-woke crowd, that's a lot harder to say. I mean, like I said, I think that I mean, I have a hard time imagining him not being contemptuous of somebody like Jordan Peterson, who's this like weird, woolly, you know, kind of mystical conservative scold. But I don't know. I mean, I guess that's ultimately really hard to say. I will also say in this part that we've been watching that Hitchens, I don't know, it's weird. I mean, it's like it's almost like you could see like different versions of him kind of like fighting for like which one is gonna like be dominant in this conversation, because like there's so much like the initial stuff he said about Israel Palestine was like very young Hitchens-esque, right? You know, it's like yeah, there's, you know, Palestinians, you know, Palestinian resistance, you know, didn't need religion to happen. Of course they resisted. They've been colonized, right? You know, like that's like a very like sort of, you know, old style kind of, you know, pre-2001 Hitchens like kind of thing to say. But then like as they're getting more into the argument and like Wright's trying to push him in the direction of saying the conflict doesn't have very much to do with religion, Hitchens is saying all these things like, well, actually, you know, everybody would be fine with Gaza, you know, the US and the European Union and everything if only Hamas, you know, weren't like religious fanatics. And it's like, I mean, maybe there's a way of making all that consistent, but like it certainly, at least as a matter of emphasis, I mean, it feels like if he was really going with the first thing that he said, he would have a much bigger problem with some of the stuff that Harris has said about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I sort of feel like he's kind of like painted himself into a corner. I mean, like because he's sort of forced to defend the claim like that religion is really at the root of everything. And I mean, obviously, it's not like it leads him to like adopt these really one-dimensional, I guess, analyses of situations. And I mean, like I think he even recognizes that to some extent. I mean, sometimes he sort of makes it more nuanced and says like it makes it maybe more difficult to solve these problems because of religion. And I think that's certainly true.
Sure. I guess. Yeah. And I don't think Wright would disagree with that. In fact, I think he said that he agrees with it. Right. But like, that's such, I mean, that's just obviously like there's some goalpost shifting there.
Yes.
Right.
Like yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is it that it's harder to solve because of the religious stuff, or is it the religious stuff kind of lies at the root of it? And it seems like, I mean, whether he just doesn't want to concede, whether it's just like stubbornness in the moment, or whether, as you say, he's kind of painted himself into a corner with his religion poisons everything position. Like, he ultimately, to the extent that he's trying to like fudge that issue of like whether it's like the main thing here, like he knows that it's not, right? I mean, like that, like Zionism in its original form was like a secular nationalist movement, and and that's the point that Wright was pushing, and Hitchens was sort of acknowledging that, although he was saying it's like, oh yes, but like but they were taking the Bible as being like a accurate source of history, even though they didn't think it was the Word of God. And it was like, okay, but like sure, fair enough, right? Like that, but that's just a very different claim, I mean, I guess maybe the reason he's emphasizing it is that like religion is indirectly poisoning everything because these religious texts are having an influence on the secular nationalist movement. But like it just seems like it would be so much better if he just acknowledged it's like, yeah, right. Zionism is originally a secular nationalist movement. Palestinian resistance would have happened regardless of the religious contours of it. Sure. Now things have been made worse because of the rise of fundamentalist movements, in all the religions involved, right? Like that's such a defensible position, and and he's sort of saying it, but like he sort of doesn't want to say it, because if he just very clearly said all of that, then that would like really take away from the like religion, his like overall claim that religion per se is the problem.
Yeah, and I guess I think also a point that Wright is making is just that if your view is that religion is like the root of the problem, that informs how you'll sort of carry out your foreign policy, I guess, and that your solutions to these issues is to try and it's not like a really feasible thing, like he says about. Is the answer just to sort of like shake these Islamists or whatever and say like, you shouldn't believe in that or whatever. And I think it's like, I mean, I guess if there was some way to snap your fingers and make everyone non-religious, the problem would still persist.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, I mean, and it's, but I mean, that is also, I mean, that's I think a larger, I mean, I think what Wright is pointing to here, like, is a larger problem with sort of thinking that like the main task, right, is to get people to not be religious. Cause it's like, okay, one, as you say, even if you could snap your fingers and somehow make everybody, not be religious, then, a lot of these problems under discussion would stop because of that. But two, like, even if we accept for the sake of argument that snapping your fingers, making everybody non-religious would have, really great effect here, since we can't do that.
Yes.
Like it actually seems plausible that like the most effective counters to probably like the people who are going to have much more effect, sort of going against like the ugliest expressions of these religious traditions are probably people with like more benign interpretations of the religious traditions, right? I mean that like that if you that if somebody's if you're trying to counteract the influence of fundamentalists, I mean I'm not. I mean, it's probably not an all or nothing thing, but like, it's at least not obvious that like, plunking Christopher Hitchens down in that situation to argue, with people about whether there's a God, is going to be more productive than like having like plunking somebody down who like has like a milder interpretation, of the religion. Like the second guy might get, more of a hearing from the people that he needs to get a hearing from.
Yeah. I think that's true. Yeah.
All right.
A caricature. What I say in my book, since it's me talking, perhaps I can just discuss that. I say, if religion will leave me alone, I'm fine. I don't even want to have to know what someone else believes, as long as they keep it at home or within their family. But I know so many people now who live in the United States and Western Europe who have to go around under armed guard for things they've published that are novels, for example, or cartoons or editorials, because Islam says, no, we will follow you home and we'll kill you because we think you've been rude to us. Now, I don't see that's a challenge, and obviously I can see from everything you've said before that you don't think so. Then I think it's time to
that's not true.
No, you have invariably in all our discussions, you said, to the extent that it's true, it's because people like me must have upset them. And I'm sorry, anyone can. Well, I don't make just an assertion. I simply say to anyone watching this, replay and see. You've never attributed the cause of any of this to itself, to its text, to its faith, to the preachments of the imams. It's invariably the outcome of some grievance that is inflicted upon them. No. This is a very, very, very dangerous parody of the real situation.
No, the preachments of imams do matter, and it gets back to a point that came up in our previous discussion, where in your critique of my op-ed piece about Major Hassan, I said his perception of the war in Afghanistan and Iraq had seemed to push him toward or onto a slippery slope toward terrorism, whatever. I said, you said no, he was pulled by this imam, this radical imam. I agree, he was pulled, and my point is American foreign policy should not give the imam the rhetorical tools to effectively pull people. So I'm not denying the role of religious preachment, of religious scripture. I'm saying, there's a lot of unfortunate stuff out in the world, including some in those categories. But I'm saying, to work with them intelligently, you cannot start with premises such as those, that is the subtitle of your book, that religion poisons everything. It manifestly does not. We do not have to eradicate religion in order to save the world.
The homicidal ravings of al-Awlaki, the imam of Major Hassan, are not the outcome of the attempt of secular democracy to defend itself.
No, not many things aren't.
They are
many
not.
Bad things aren't.
They are their own responsibility, and the responsibility for it is his. And one day, I hope we'll catch up with him.
Okay. Finally, before I
you'll then be able to say when he goes on trial, poor guy, he was driven to it by who will it be? The editor of the Copenhagen paper, by Salman Rushdie, by Ayan Hirsi Ali. They all just made his head buzz like a hive and forced him to tell people to shoot their medical colleagues, having taken a Hippocratic oath. Do you understand why I'm sounding?
Just going to interject here to say that that I think what Hitchens is saying right here is pretty good proof that he said earlier that religion makes smart people say stupid things. I think what Hitchens is saying right here is pretty good proof that religion is not the only thing that does that. Because Hitchens is such a smart guy, and this is just such a dumb thing for him to say right now, that really he thinks that what Wright just said was that terrorists or are forced to be terrorists by, Salman Rushdie or whatever. I mean, what Wright just said was that it makes it easier for radical imams to recruit people to their cause if the United States does things in its foreign policy that give them lots of fodder for it. Like that's a completely different claim than the one that like Hitchens is like set up to get indignant about.
Yeah. It's weird how he keeps doing this tactic in the debate of like getting offended at something, and it's usually not even what Wright is arguing. It's some like it's what Hitchens imagines he's arguing. Yeah,
absolutely.
Thing like this, I find it hateful to think that you really did believe anything of what you just said.
As I said in the previous dialogue, when I point to something may indeed have encouraged someone to do something bad, like the Iraq War encouraging this Major Hassan to kill people, I do not mean to in the least alleviate them from moral responsibility or assign blame in a moral sense to America. I'm trying to illuminate the costs and benefits of policy. I'm trying to illuminate the costs and benefits of policy. And as I said last time, until we get better in defiance of right-wing propagandists at separating the question of blame from the question of impartial causal analysis about costs and benefits of alternative policies, we will be screwed. And I'm not sure I have your support in that campaign. Before I graciously give you the last word, I just want to say one thing. I was very relieved to hear you say earlier that your feeling is kind of live and let live. What people want to believe in the privacy of their own churches, as long as they don't do any harm, is their business. I'm relieved to hear you say that. I'm a little surprised because I've got to say the tone that comes out of your writing is the following. My view is that life is hard. I really find it hard, and I think anyone who takes a stab at living a moral life is going to find it hard. I believe everyone who does that winds up doing it on the basis of something they can't prove, something probably that is in some sense irrational, and often something that is in some sense a crutch. What I hear you saying, and maybe you've now corrected me, and I won't think you're saying that anymore, but what comes through in the tone of your writing is, well, I'm sorry, but all of you are coping with this difficult challenge of life in a way that's just intellectually laughable. And if only you were as smart as I am, you wouldn't be resorting to this. And that seems to me not really a lit and let live policy. That seems to be a live and ridicule policy. And it really bothers me, the elitism and air of superiority in your writing.
Well, I'll come at that in reverse order, if I may. The religion makes very large claims for itself. In some cases it claims to be infallible or to have spokesmen who are. It also says, if you agree with us, we can offer you salvation. If you don't, we can promise you damnation. These are very big claims that they then want to say, by the way, you're not allowed to criticize or ridicule this either. I must say, I think that's asking a bit much, don't you? Now, then, if their fallback position is, well, it makes people behave better, well, I think we've already discussed that. I say there's no proof that people wouldn't have behaved that well anyway, and there are many crimes specifically attributable to superstitious and supernatural belief. And then on the point of coexistence, which I do say in my book, it's because they won't accept the offer. I mean, I do have to hear from a madrasa in Virginia, very short way, distance from where I'm sitting now, preachments from a man who now chooses to live in Yemen for his own safety, having encouraged the 9/11 hijackers and Major Hassan. I am forced to listen to that. In Washington, just to stay where we are, the Catholic Church has just said, if the city passes an ordinance about gay rights, it wants to withdraw from its charitable donations to the city. It won't be involved if it has to recognize this kind of thing. Makes it very clear, by the way, that their effort is a proselytizing one, not just a charitable one. American tax dollars are spent all the time on aid to Israel, some part of which is used for the building of the establishment of a religion on the West Bank by messianic thieves who hope to bring on the Messiah. And I can hardly open the newspaper without seeing another attempt to have government money spent on the teaching of pseudoscience in our schools. Now, if you want to coexist with me, have your religious beliefs. I don't care. I will continue to find them ridiculous, and I'll continue to satirize them. I hope you can take it. If your God isn't strong enough to insulate you against my jokes, too bad, tough. But don't try and have your beliefs taught to my children. Don't ask for my tax dollars to support your church. Don't ask for my money to be spent on colonial settlements. And don't preach jihad in my neighborhood. Or threaten to send people from Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere to kill friends of mine in London for the crime of writing a novel. Have I begun to make myself play? They won't leave me alone. So I am a member of a group that you scorn and insult. And
I don't scorn atheists. I do not scorn.
No, you've written nothing but scornful.
Atheists.
You've written scornful and insulting things about a group you call the New Atheists, as if we were the fundamentalists.
True.
I've decided to become a member of a force of people. It doesn't need every time 5 times a day to pray. Doesn't need constant reinforcement. Doesn't need to sing hymns saying what Jesus wants or any nonsense of this kind. Just coolly decides there must be a pushback to theocracy and its propagandists and its actions. And it's long overdue, and a defense of science and reason and humanism. And to that proposition, I am, without sounding too sententious about it, willing to give the rest of my life. And you might ask me, why would I do that, since I think I'm only a primate? And I say, well, some questions are undecidable. But in the meantime, I'm not willing to be told what to do by people who say that God gives them a right to push me around. I won't spend a minute of my life that way.
I agree that you should not. And in keeping with my vow to let you have the last word, I will.
Oh, I think that was it, wasn't it?
What's that? Those words were the last, I think.
Well,
yeah.
I thought you said we were already over time.
We are over time. That's why I decided that those should be your last words.
Oh, well, good. I thought you said I could have some more. That would be
no.
That would be greedy.
If you want more, I have made a vow of silence, obviously, in asserting that you would have the last word. So I can't say more. If you want to say more, go ahead.
No. Really, I think you've been more than generous.
Okay. Well, you have more than I have, because I know your services are very much in demand. Yet you agreed to do this for free, a doubleheader taping, 2 consecutive hours of enduring me. I really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure, and in some ways an illumination. And if you find anybody who will pay us to do this, let me know, okay?
You bet.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
Thanks for
take
having
care.
me.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Right.
Yeah, it's funny to see him do this. Yes, this 2009. I mean, that chat comment I put on the screen, I mean, it made me laugh. I mean, it really does feel like that. Like this is some debate that he had last year during COVID, that like it's because it's such it feels so weird to see him in this format, that like it.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Yeah. On 2 screens. Yeah. Right.
Like it looks like a Zoom call. It's and it's like, yeah. I mean, because like almost every single Hitchens debate, is in person. It's and so just seeing him as like one half of a computer screen feels very off. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like I think that, I guess we talked about a lot of the sort of specifics of what happened in that debate, but like of the arguments they both made. Like I think that the thing that I have to say I find most disappointing about Hitchens' half of it is that he like really does seem to be having some trouble like keeping track of exactly what Wright's position is. Like even in that closing like statement when he got the last word, like I mean, I don't know, the way he kept using the word you, it's like I think that's just the generic you, but it feels a little bit like he's talking to Wright. And like clearly none of this applies to him. The man is not a believer.
Yes, yeah. No, exactly, yeah. I think that's what makes it kind of a unique debate, because I guess it's not a formal debate, but anyway, it is unusual to come across someone who's like sort of challenging him from a secular perspective. But it was funny, like, just to sort of think about like the reception of it at the time. I mean, like thinking like when I watched it, thinking that Hitchens, obviously sort of fended off all of Wright's challenges, and even that Robert Wright said at some point in the middle of the debate, like, you know, yeah, like all the comments
The
are going to be
comments,
supportive of you and the stuff like that. And it's sort of funny. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, do you think that it's like things have changed since then? Maybe it's just that everyone was kind of like,
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like for me anyway, like I was sort of a new atheist in that I had just sort of become an atheist, and I was sort of like really consuming a whole bunch of new atheist content and stuff. And I mean, I felt like I kind of identified with them, and it's like this is sort of my group, and they must be right. And therefore, I kind of ignored maybe some of these challenges to their arguments. But I wonder if the debate, you know, if things have changed now.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I think that my impression is like, you know, 2009 new atheism. I mean, there is still a version of it that exists, but it's like it's a shadow, you know, of what it was. Like that there is, and I don't know. I mean, I kind of suspect that even what sort of resembles it that still exists. I mean, there are definitely people who are exactly that strident, but I mean, like you know, like is there anything that really still feels like a movement, you know, that's strident about it? I'm not sure, but like, but I feel like for the most part, people who were like new atheists in 2009 have, you know, have gone on to other things in one form or another, right? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think another thing maybe too is the context has changed a little bit. That I feel like at that time, I mean, we were just, I guess in 2009, like the Bush administration was just over, but I think like this sort of more explicitly conservative Christian politics was still sort of dominant in the country, and like jihadist terrorism was still on everyone's minds, and I think it's changed in maybe with regard to the first point. I feel like obviously the Republicans are still like totally enthralled to white evangelicals, but it's almost like I wonder what you think about this. Like, it seems like it's a lot more. They're sort of cynically using religion rather than with like the Bush administration. I sort of got the impression that they really believed what they were saying, whereas obviously like with Trump, I mean, he didn't know anything about religion, and I think the people who are sort of the white evangelicals who are voting for him, it's more of like a political identity than a religious one.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of no, I mean that's definitely true. Like that, like it's some combination of, well, I mean they're just conservatives. They'll vote for even the more conservative candidate, but also like to the extent that they, yeah, I think evangelical support for Trump is some combination of like, hey, who cares what he says as long as he like appoints our judges, then like, you know, it doesn't matter, we'll ignore that. Like that's the reading where they are still, you know, sort of consumed with the kind of, you know, agenda, you know, that they were in 2009, which in some ways they are. I don't know, it's complicated, but like then like the other reading, which I also think is a little bit true, is it's like it's just all about culture war at this point. It's like I would like my joke was always that like Donald Trump could you know, could give a speech where he like, you know, splattered blood on an inverted cross, and as long as he triggered the limbs in the speech, you know, the evangelicals would still like it. You know? Like,
yeah, right.
Because he's so obviously just totally alien to their value system, and they're willing to look past it because he was on their team, you know, in the culture war. I mean, like this is, I mean, it's kind of amazing if you think back to, you know, how much, you know, like how much people cared about the Clinton sex scandals in the 90s. and how much like, you know, of the appeal of George W. Bush was about, you know, his personal
Right.
religiosity and values. And like, you know, it's like the Stormy Daniels thing, that was like a day and a half of the news cycle of Trump. He was like, oh
Right.
yeah, that happened, right? I almost forgot.
Mhm. Yeah, right. Yes, exactly. Yeah. 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 But yeah. So I do feel like there has been some kind of shift in like, I don't know if it's just just me like taking a more nuanced view of politics, but it does seem like yeah, there's more going on than just like, you know, it would be too simplistic to say like Republicans today are just simply motivated by their religion or something like that.
Yeah, right. And I don't think they were ever just motivated by their religion,
Mm,
but like religion was certainly a much bigger part of the branding in
mhm.
2009. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing you mentioned too about terrorism, like
Mhm.
I think probably a big part of why the new atheist movement happened, you know, in the 2000s is the combination of jihadist terrorism being so much on people's minds in a way that's just not now for the most part,
Mhm. Mhm.
and with with the fact that American conservatism was so associated with evangelical Christianity during the Bush years. And
Mhm.
so like those two things I think combined to like put religion right at the center of
Mhm.
a lot of progressives, you know, worldview. I mean,
Mhm.
and like some of it's kind of funny to look back on, right? Like I went through this little tear a while ago where I kind of discovered some of Kyle Kalinski's old videos from, you know, I mean his Twitter is still like secular talk. And
Mhm.
like it's kind of funny because it's like, wait a second, he never talks about anything that has to do with
Right.
that, you know. But
Yeah.
he did back then.
Mhm.
And you
Mhm.
know, and you look at, you know, so it's like, yeah, I mean, when I went back and watched some of like Kyle Kalinski's old New Atheist videos, it's like, oh, this is
Mhm.
kind of funny, right? I mean, this is like a little time warp, you know, back to you know,
Yeah.
that moment in American
Mhm.
culture. But I think it totally makes sense that at that time somebody like Kyle Kalinski was you know, was really fixated on the atheism and religion stuff because that was, you know, I mean, that was what the, you know, the culture wars were about religion to a much greater extent and certainly a much more explicit way, you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
than they usually are now. Now, like some of it is right, like you know, people will, you know, have these little wars about like I mean, I don't want to be dismissive of it. I think there's like a real civil rights issue here, but like, you know, about like the, you know, person who doesn't want to, you know, bake the cake for the gay wedding and all that
Mhm.
stuff, you know, like, and so like obviously everybody knows that's a religious thing, you know,
Mhm.
at its
Mhm.
base. But I feel like most culture war skirmishes right now aren't like on their face about religion.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I also feel like, yeah, or like 10 years ago or more, I mean, actually like talking people out of their religion might have actually had a political effect. I mean,
Uh,
do you think? I mean, whereas
uh,
now, like it's, I mean, again, like with Trump, like obviously he's not religious, so like, you know, talking him out of religion because he doesn't believe it anyway, it's not going to make any difference. But I feel like, I don't know, back then maybe if you did talk a conservative out of their religious views, they might change politically. I'm not
yeah,
sure.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's definitely some German truth in that. I mean, I think that in that back then, I mean, I knew tons of people who were like this,
Mm,
who grew up in households that were very like conservative or religious, and certainly, you know, losing their religion was part of the process for them
mm,
of, you know, and like probably like a necessary step, you know, in the process for them
mhm,
of you know, and something that was very bound up, you know, with rejecting the conservative political beliefs, right? Like I
mm,
think that was just clearly like psychologically true of a lot of people, you know, in that
mm,
era that they would that like religious skepticism was maybe even the first step in some process, and you know, and it was definitely bound up with rejecting the socially conservative stuff, and
mhm,
maybe even like once they were questioning a lot of other things, you know, they might move further to the left on other stuff. But like at a time like so many of the big battles that were going on were about things like, should gay people be allowed to get married? Like that's so, I mean, that's so obviously bound up with religion that that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true. I mean, although of course, you could just become, you could just become a liberal Christian, and plenty of people did,
That's true. Yeah, maybe it's also that there's more of a straightforward path to be like a secular kind of culture war conservative, maybe than there was back then. I'm not sure.
No, I think that's definitely true. Like, because in 2009, I mean, there were obviously people like Hitchens, right? Who were extremely secular and who were who had like right-wing foreign policy positions, or who there were, but like I feel like the culture war was so different in 2009 that like even people who were like secular, like libertarians who had like right-wing economic views, like in a culture war sense, those people still coded as liberals because it's like they didn't because they didn't want to like ban abortion and stop gay people from getting married, and like Bill Maher back then, like was sort of like sometimes he would make these like weird confused comments about I'm a libertarian or whatever. It's a little unclear what he meant, right? But it's like everybody sort of understood that was coded as like as culturally liberal, whereas now I think that I don't think there was a clear way. I mean, I'm sure there were individuals and whatever, but like, I don't think there was like a sort of big block of culture war politics in 2009 that was secular, but like culture war right wing, right? Like, I don't think that would have made sense to most people as a combination. Whereas now, obviously, there clearly is.
Yeah, I guess it could just be like you said, like many of the culture war issues then were explicitly tied up with religion, so it wouldn't even make sense to be a secular person that way. Yeah.
I mean, I will say probably that like conservative in some sort of cultural sense, but not religious, is something that's like, even though there are obviously lots of representatives we could think of those combination of views, I think it's probably still like a fairly like minority, position, right? I mean, like, okay, Trump clearly is not actually religious in any way. I mean, like famously, I mean, I think there was some point in the past when he was attending the church of that, like how to win friends and influence people guy, but like, but like Trump is clearly not religious. Like I think in the 2016 campaign, there was like a thing where he was asked like what his favorite book was, and he said the Bible, and they were like, "Oh, what's your favorite passage?" And like he didn't know any passages from the Bible.
Yeah, I think he said something like, "Well, it's just very personal to me," and some just sort of dodge like that.
So like clearly Donald Trump is like never cracked open a Bible, clearly doesn't go to church, but he's never gonna like come out and say, like, I don't believe in God, or I'm an agnostic, or anything like that. Like that would never happen, because he's not gonna, because he knows that like his most reliable base of support, are the white evangelicals, and he would never alienate them, in that way. And like, I think that the people who are like sort of anti-woke to the point where it feels appropriate to call them culturally right wing, but who are not religious, like I think that's like a type of guy who's probably overrepresented in like political media. But
that's true. That's true.
But like I don't know, like that's like the faculty of the University of Austin or whatever. But like I don't know, I don't know, like what percentage of the population that realistically makes up.
Yeah, I think in the last presidential election, I think it was about 75% of non-religious people voted for for Biden, and 25% for Trump. So I mean,
okay,
yeah.
So there's like a chunk, but like, yeah, no, that seems,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean that makes sense to me. I mean, like I think that's, yeah, I think that there are like a million people with YouTube channels who are in the 20, like the 25%, but
Yeah,
but
right.
like,
Yeah.
it's still a relatively small, minority
Mhm.
of the overall, um, of the overall population, and also like, yeah, that there are people who, again, like people who are just like secular libertarians. They existed in 2009. They exist now. I don't know how much their views on cultural stuff have really changed.
Yeah.
They might have a little bit, right? But I mean, like, and how much of it's just that like the culture has changed in ways that they don't like.
Yeah. No, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Because like, yeah, I mean, again, like in 2009, like somebody like that, would have been like, yeah, I think that like, um, Bush, George W. Bush's religious stuff sounds weird and scary to me, and I like smoking pot, and and I think gay people should be able to do whatever they want, and like which I'm sure are all positions that still hold now, but but in 2009, that meant that at least on cultural issues, there would be that would be somebody who liberals would basically like, and now like it could be that same guy is like, well, people, he was probably always a little bit sexist, but people notice it more now, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
would be my guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's some difference, I guess, between like those sort of old-fashioned libertarians and the ones like this sort of people who have said they've been kind of pushed rightward by wokeism. I mean, I feel like they're almost like they're not conservative, but like they're not really for some like positive conservative thing. They're more just anti woke. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Like there is so right. So those are different categories. There's the so we should distinguish, right? Like there's the guy who is like your sort of Bill Maher-esque libertarian, who probably hasn't changed very much, but like probably your like core sort of University of Austin faculty member kind of guy is not that, right? Like
Right.
that's somebody who maybe has views that are kind of like that, or maybe had views that were sort of generically liberal, but like they've just gotten so annoyed by by like culture war wokeness that like basically they don't have any politics except that they're like really against that.
Yeah, I think and then it's like those people are sort of hard to classify.
Some of them end up actually become like real conservatives.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Yeah.
The sort of Dave Rubin or whatever kind of trajectory that like so that's true. That's like a separate category of person, and that's probably also a category of person who's probably relatively secular, like that they're not so they're probably so a lot of those people probably are atheists or agnostics, but but I mean I don't know, it's weird too, because like and I don't know, and of course I mean obviously I find those people really frustrating for many reasons, but like also it's just like I don't know, like that you could just like you're allowed to just like acknowledge that certain forms of culture war wokeness are dumb, but like still be a leftist, right? I mean, like this, that's allowed, like you can have that combination of positions, that you don't actually have to let it like determine your entire worldview. That you see that you think some of this stuff is like dumb or cringy or overly censorious or whatever. Like you could just. You can just hold those views, but like still think everything else that you've always thought, about the larger world, and perhaps even think that like, that stuff being dumb or cringy or overly censorious or whatever, like, is bad, but that's actually not the most important issue in the world or
Right.
in the top 10.
Yeah, exactly. And like, and also then like, what policies are you supporting that actually, or like, how does that play out in like sort of policy terms? Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that seems right. But I mean, like, I will say too, like, I mean, related to what you were saying, like, I think that something that people often don't quite seem to remember about the new atheism era and like late Hitchens, is that, I guess, I don't know. I don't have like polling data on this. This is all anecdotal, but like, my strong impression is that, like, there were probably at least half of the people who, like, we would have more or less thought of as fans of new atheism era Hitchens who didn't agree with any of his foreign policy stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You know, like they were just there for, I mean, they were just there for the debates about religion and the, you know, and like, they obviously liked it because of the accent and the panache and the fact that he was this, you know, incredibly talented rhetorician and, you know, all that stuff, right? Like that they, and they liked what he said. They liked what he wrote, you know, about religion, but like, but yeah, I would be surprised if it were less than half of people who were fans of Hitchens qua atheist who disagreed with Hitchens qua, you know, Iraq war supporter.
Yeah. I wonder too, like, if another difference, I mean, between then and now is that maybe there was more like intellectual openness, for lack of a better word. Like, one could be like, oh yeah, I like Hitchens, but I don't like his foreign policy views or something like that. Whereas now it's like, if you disagree with someone on something, it's like the whole person, like, there's just like a terrible person, like, I hate that person, they're garbage or whatever.
I think that's 100% right. I think that the culture has gotten a lot more Manichaean about like sorting people into the good box and the bad box, you know, that like, it's yeah, like I think that some of it is just the, you know, like, some of it is just like the sort of way that like Twitter has like worn away at everybody, and some, I don't know, like, it's incredibly multi-causal, I'm sure, but like the result is like really, really clear to me that like that I think there was absolutely more room for that in 2009, not just with him, but like with anybody, you know, that
and I think maybe that's, I mean, just to be sort of charitable to the IDW people, like, maybe that's some of what they are kind of standing for, in that, like, you know, like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro can like hang out together even though they have disagreements. I mean, I feel like there's maybe some of that sort of spirit of being like, you know, we can disagree on these different things, but not be like, you know, desiring to cancel them or whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, sure. Although I also would really question, like, okay, so like, what's the priority ranking here? That like because it's not just that, like, you know, it's not just that like Sam Harris is like willing to like have a beer with Ben Shapiro and like, you know, and like watch the game together. Not that I can imagine either of them doing that, but like Harris maybe, but you know, it's that like they clearly at one point, right? I mean, Harris, as you said, you know, made that big point of saying he was turning in his, you know, non-existent, you know, membership card, but he has, like, you know, at one point, like, they clearly saw themselves as like really aligned with each other, and then it'd be like, okay, but like, what's the sort of like overriding thing that you see yourself as aligned on that's like more important than all the stuff you disagree on? Because like I don't know. I mean, like, what's the like if you're gonna say like, okay, so like 2009 Christopher Hitchens, it's like, okay, the bad column is he has these like horrendous foreign policy views, and the good column, depending on your point of view about some of this stuff, is the the religion debates, the fact that he's got this sort of like wealth of historical knowledge and literary references that just like make him fun to watch, maybe some of the like literary cultural criticism, like his positions on domestic culture war issues, like those are all things that you can like, even if you hate the Iraq War stuff. And don't get me wrong, the Iraq War is definitely the most important, objectively of those, but still, like, there's a lot to like, right? That it's even if when you put it all together, I mean, the Iraq War is so huge that's like, that's going to dwarf anything. Like, it's really easy to say what you would like about him, even at that point of his career, right? Like, at least for me, it's really hard to say what anybody would like about Ben Shapiro. I mean, like that's it's like
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Is it the I mean, is it his position on Palestinians? Is it that you think he has a really pleasant sounding voice? It's like, do you think that he has got some like amazing philosophical insights? Like, what's the what's the good part? I don't know what the good part is, except I guess in this case, like, I guess from Sam Harris's perspective, just that they were like reacting vaguely, that they were like vaguely reacting to some of the same cultural stuff, I guess.
Yeah. I guess another thing, I mean, to be like super charitable to them is like just that he seems to be willing to debate people. I mean, whereas other people maybe on the left maybe wouldn't do that. So I mean, I don't know. I mean,
yeah, I mean that is a good thing. That's, I mean, I actually wish he'd be willing to do that a little bit more often. But yeah, sure. Yes, sure. That is a good thing. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm even like, I mean, I don't even think it has to be like, an overall moral evaluation, like, that's like, okay, I'm making a determination about whether somebody's more good or bad. Cause like, I don't know, why should you have to make that determination? Like that's you can just like, and I think that is a bad thing about the culture now, that like people are way too inclined to like think that they have to make that determination about everybody. But like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
But even so, it's like, I mean, again, I can even like, we can even go into like really extreme cases, like, okay, like, Heidegger was a member of the Nazi Party, but like, I think he said like really insightful things in Being in Time or whatever, right? Not that that's what I would say, but like, like there are people who would say that, right? Like, and I get it, right? It's like, okay, I understand what you like, about somebody who's surely in any larger sense, like much more bad than good, but like, but like, I think that in the IDW case, like any of those guys, like, I mean, I guess maybe there are some like sort of general free speech or open debate views that some of them have that are good that I like, but like, that would be about it, right? Like I don't, I don't like anything really about any of them. I guess Sam Harris is a very soothing voice.
Yeah. I mean, I agree for the most part. I think the idea is that they're supposed to be somewhat nonpartisan, although actually that isn't true for most of them. I mean, sometimes they're like explicitly partisan. But
which is part of why Harris eventually dropped out. Because like I think that he thought that he was signing up for a team that was like, anti-woke, but at least never Trump. But then like it turns out that like a bunch of other people on the team like took the first part so seriously that they were willing to like back off on the second part. I mean, I mean, I think that was the big, I think that like a big part of what like caused Harris to like back out and say, no, that's, don't lump me together with these people was like Brett Weinstein spreading like conspiracy theories about the 2020 election.
Yeah, and just like the anti-vax stuff.
Yeah, that too.
So,
Well, yeah, which is also like really interesting to see how that split a lot of that crowd. Claire Lehman, is the editor of Quillette. So like certainly sort of like
right.
a big like mover and shaker in the sort of like anti-woke, not exactly conservative, but kind of conservative world. But like so many of her former fans have turned on her now and like kind of hate her now because like she's pro-vaccine and she'll like say stuff on Twitter about like, no, it's really irresponsible to spread conspiracy theories about this.
Yeah. No, I mean it is interesting. I mean, like just also because like there is this sort of ethos of like openness and like being willing to say whatever, but in practice, people are like turning on these like IDW people if they sort of support vaccines or whatever, and then their fans turn on them. So
because it's like because it's like, okay, at the time, like originally, what was it, like 2017, Barry Weiss wrote the article that I think first popularized the phrase intellectual dark web in the New York Times. And like at the time, it was like, okay, this is nonpartisan, although there's at least pretty clearly like a specific like niche that's like the crazy college kids have gone too far, but don't worry, we're not Trump supporters. That was like what they were going for.
Right.
And then like now now it's like everything has like metastasized to the point that like Sam Harris and Claire Lehman are like a little bit on the outs with like most of those people because they like think that vaccines work and they think that Biden won the election.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. It's getting late. I'm not going to keep you, but thank you so much for doing this. Do you want to tell people about your podcast?
Yeah, I've got a podcast called Beyond Atheism, and it's sort of about basically like beyond the God debate, sort of, and what's next, what atheists should be doing next. I've got a book too that I want to, if I can plug that as well. It came out a couple of years ago. It's called Race in a Godless World: Atheism, Race, and Civilization, 1850 to 1914. Sort of about historical atheist views about race. So
that sounds great. I will actually do that. So all right.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nathan.
All right. Okay. Thanks. Have a good night.
Thanks. You too.